please, be our daddy today." Those 5 words, whispered through chattering teeth by 2 little girls standing in knee-deep snow, should have been easy to refuse. Ethan Cross was a man who'd spent 3 years running from ghosts, from memories, from anything that resembled the family he'd lost. He was a drifter, a ghost himself. But when he looked into those desperate eyes, he saw something he couldn't ignore, the same terror his own son must have felt in those final moments. This is the story of the plea that shattered a broken man's walls, the corruption that tried to bury the truth, and the family forged not by blood, but by an impossible choice. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city name in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. Now, let's begin. The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing that morning, brutal and unforgiving, carrying with it the kind of cold that didn't just chill the body. It threatened to stop the heart altogether. Ethan Cross had felt that kind of cold before, but never in Montana. The last time had been in a different place, a different life, when he'd knelt in the snow over bodies that had once been warm, had once been everything. He shook the thought away, the way he always did, and pulled his coat tighter. The road stretched out before him, a ribbon of frozen dirt cutting through endless white. His horse, a roan gelding he'd won in a card game 2 towns back, plodded forward with the resigned patience of an animal that knew its rider had nowhere particular to be. Ethan didn't mind. Nowhere was exactly where he was headed. He'd left his badge in a desk drawer in Colorado 3 years ago, right after the funeral. Right after he'd realized that all the law in the world couldn't protect the people who mattered. What good was justice when it came too late? What good was a lawman who couldn't save his own? So he drifted, town to town, job to job, never staying long enough for anyone to ask questions or for the nightmares to find comfortable places to settle. He'd worked as a ranch hand, a freight guard, even a bouncer in a saloon that smelled like desperation and broken dreams. The work didn't matter. Nothing did. The town of Salvation Ridge appeared on the horizon like a cruel joke, a collection of weathered buildings huddled together against the cold, as if proximity alone could provide warmth. Ethan had no intention of stopping. Towns meant people, and people meant complications. But his horse needed rest, and if he was honest with himself, so did he. That's when he saw them. 2 small figures stood by a broken fence at the edge of the road, so still they might have been carved from ice. For a moment, Ethan thought his mind was playing tricks on him. The cold and the isolation sometimes did that, conjured phantoms from guilt and grief. But as he drew closer, the figures solidified into something heartbreakingly real. 2 little girls. The older one couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, wearing a coat that had probably fit her 2 winters ago and boots that were held together with what looked like wire and hope. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves around a face that was far too serious for a child. She held the hand of a smaller girl, maybe 5 years old, whose lips had gone the kind of blue that made Ethan's chest tighten. He should have ridden past. Every instinct he'd cultivated over 3 years of deliberate numbness told him to keep moving, to pretend he hadn't seen them, to let someone else handle whatever tragedy was unfolding here. But his horse had already stopped, as if the animal possessed more humanity than its rider. "Mister?" The older girl's voice cut through the wind, thin but determined. "Mister, please." Ethan sat frozen in the saddle, his hands tight on the reins. Don't engage, don't ask, don't care. But the little one was shaking so hard he could see it from 20 feet away. "What are you doing out here?" The words came out harsher than he'd intended, roughened by disuse and the cold. "Where are your parents?" The older girl's jaw tightened. In that moment, she looked ancient, burdened with knowledge no child should carry. "Mama's sick, real sick, and Papa," her voice caught. "Papa's gone." "Gone where?" "Just gone." She said it with a finality that suggested the conversation was closed on that subject. "Please, mister, we need help. Mama needs medicine, and the doctor won't come no more, and Mr. Hale said we gotta be out by Sunday, or—" "Hold on." Ethan raised a hand, already regretting that he hadn't kept riding. "Slow down. Who's Mr. Hale?" But the little one had started crying, silent tears freezing on her cheeks, and the older girl pulled her closer with the fierce protectiveness of someone who'd already lost too much. "Please," the older girl said again, and this time her voice cracked. Just for today, please be our daddy today. The words hit Ethan like a physical blow. Be our daddy today. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, at the cosmic cruelty of these children asking the one thing of the one man who was least equipped to give it. He wanted to tell them he'd already been a daddy once, and he'd failed so spectacularly that his son had died screaming. He wanted to wheel his horse around and disappear into the white wasteland behind him. Instead, he heard himself say, "What are your names?" The older girl's eyes widened with desperate hope. "I'm Lily. This is Emma. And Mama's name is Rachel. Rachel Miller." "And where is Rachel Miller?" "At our house, down that road." Lily pointed to a narrow track that led away from the main road, barely visible under the snow. "It's not far. Please, mister, I can make you coffee. We got eggs. I don't need coffee." Ethan dismounted, his joints protesting the cold. Up close, the girls looked even worse. Emma's face was hollow with hunger, and Lily had a bruise on her cheek that was too perfectly finger-shaped to be an accident. "How long has your mother been sick?" 3 days, real bad, but she's been getting worse for weeks." "And the doctor won't come?" Lily's expression darkened. "Not since Mr. Hale told him not to." There it was again. Hale. Ethan filed the name away, recognizing the pattern he'd seen in a dozen towns, some local power broker who ran things through fear and control. It was none of his business. These people were none of his business. But Emma had stopped crying and was looking up at him with eyes the color of a summer sky, and he found he couldn't quite make his feet carry him back to his horse. "Show me," he said quietly. Lily's face transformed. "You mean it? You'll help?" "I'll look at your mother. That's all I'm promising." It was more than he'd promised anyone in 3 years, and it felt like stepping off a cliff. The Miller house, if you could call it that, was a testament to hardship and decline. The roof sagged in the middle, several windows were stuffed with rags against the cold, and the whole structure listed slightly to one side as if considering whether to give up entirely. Smoke trickled from the chimney at least, which meant someone had managed to keep a fire going. Lily led him inside, Emma still clutching her hand. The interior was barely warmer than outside, and the smell hit him immediately. Sickness, unwashed bodies, and the particular despair of poverty ground down to its final, desperate edge. A woman lay on a narrow bed in the corner, covered with every blanket and coat the family must have owned. Her face was flushed with fever, her breathing labored and wet-sounding. Even in the dim light, Ethan could see the resemblance to Lily in the shape of her face, though illness had carved hollows where vitality should have been. "Mama," Lily whispered, kneeling beside the bed. "Mama, I brought help." Rachel Miller's eyes fluttered open. They were gray, Ethan noticed, the color of storm clouds, and even dulled by fever, they held an intelligence that assessed him in a single glance. "Who?" She tried to sit up, was seized by a coughing fit that racked her whole body. When it passed, there was blood on her lips. Ethan knelt beside the bed, his old instincts taking over. He'd seen enough sickness on the frontier to recognize the signs. "How long have you been coughing blood?" 2 days. Her voice was barely audible. "Who are you?" "Name's Ethan Cross. Your daughters found me on the road." Rachel's eyes went to Lily, and the fear in them was primal. "Lily, what did I tell you about—" "I know, Mama, but you're getting worse and nobody will help. And Mr. Hale said Sunday and I didn't know what else to do." The words tumbled out in a rush, and Lily was crying now too. Ethan held up a hand. "Everybody calm down. Mrs. Miller, you need a doctor." "Can't afford one. Even if you could, he won't come," Lily said bitterly. "Not since Papa—" She stopped, shooting a glance at her mother. Rachel closed her eyes. "My husband died 6 weeks ago. Accident," they said. "After that, Mr. Hale started calling in debts, and suddenly nobody in town wants to help us anymore." "Who is Hale?" "Victor Hale. He owns the bank, the general store, half the businesses in Salvation Ridge." Rachel's laugh turned into another cough. "And every soul in it, apparently." Ethan had heard variations of this story before. Small town, big man, people too scared or too dependent to stand up. It was a tale as old as the West itself. And it was, he reminded himself firmly, not his problem. But Emma had climbed onto the bed and was curled against her mother's side, and Lily was looking at him with the kind of hope that was dangerous to give a child, and he found himself asking, "What kind of medicine do you need?" Rachel shook her head. "Doesn't matter, I can't pay for it. That's not what I asked." For a long moment they studied each other. Ethan saw a woman who'd been pushed to the absolute edge, who was fighting with everything she had to keep her children safe, even as her body betrayed her. Rachel saw something in him too. He could tell by the way her expression shifted from suspicion to a desperate, cautious trust. "Doctor Morrison, he's 3 towns over in Silver Falls. He might have something. Laudanum, at least, for the pain. Maybe medicine for the fever and the cough." She closed her eyes. "But it's a day's ride in good weather, and I can't send the girls alone, and I can't—" Another coughing fit seized her. When it passed, Ethan stood. "I'll go." "What?" Rachel stared at him. "Why would you— We can't pay you." "I didn't ask to be paid." Lily jumped up. "I'll go with you. I can show you the way, and—" "No." Ethan's tone was firm. "You stay here. Keep the fire going. Keep your mother warm. Can you do that?" Lily nodded, her small face serious. "Yes, sir." "Good." Ethan looked down at Rachel. "I'll be back by tomorrow afternoon if the weather holds. Keep her hydrated. If the fever gets worse—" He stopped. What was he doing? This wasn't his responsibility. These people were strangers. But Rachel was looking at him like he'd just offered her the world, and Emma had fallen asleep against her mother's side, and Lily was standing at attention like a soldier awaiting orders. "Just keep the fire going," he finished roughly. Outside, the wind had picked up, and the sky had taken on the particular gray that promised more snow. Ethan stood in the yard for a moment, staring at his horse and wondering what the hell he was doing. He could leave right now, should leave. These people would be a complication he didn't need, and getting involved would only lead to the kind of pain he'd spent 3 years trying to outrun. The door creaked behind him. Lily stood in the doorway, her thin arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "Mr. Cross?" He turned. "What? You'll really come back? You promise?" And there it was, the question that cut to the heart of everything. Every promise he'd made and failed to keep, every vow that had turned to ash. Every time he'd sworn to protect and defend, and had ended up with nothing but blood on his hands and ghosts in his head. He should tell her the truth, that he was nobody's savior, that promises were worthless, that she'd be better off hoping for a miracle from someone else. Instead, he said, "I'll come back." Lily's smile was like sunrise. "Thank you. Thank you so much. You're like an angel." Ethan almost laughed. An angel, if she only knew. "Just keep your mother warm," he said, and swung into the saddle before he could change his mind. The ride to Silver Falls took longer than he'd hoped. The snow started falling an hour out, thick and relentless, cutting visibility to almost nothing. Ethan pushed forward anyway, driven by something he didn't want to examine too closely. The sensible thing would be to find shelter, wait out the storm. But he kept seeing Emma's blue lips, kept hearing Lily's voice. "Please be our daddy today." It was dark when he finally reached Silver Falls, a town only marginally larger than Salvation Ridge, but with the advantage of an actual hotel and a doctor's shingle hanging over a storefront on Main Street. Ethan hammered on the door until a light appeared in the window above. Dr. Morrison turned out to be a tired-looking man in his 50s, with the perpetual squint of someone who'd spent too many years reading by poor light. He listened to Ethan's description of Rachel's symptoms with growing concern. "Sounds like pneumonia," Morrison said, already pulling bottles from his shelves. "Maybe consumption, though at this stage it's hard to say. Either way, she needs these." He wrapped several bottles in paper. "Laudanum for the pain, this tonic for the fever, and this one for the cough. Mix it with warm water 3 times a day." "How much?" Morrison named a price that made Ethan wince, but he paid it without argument. The doctor eyed him curiously as he counted out the bills. "You family?" "No." "Friend?" "Never met her before today." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Generous of you, then." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have an answer that made sense even to himself. "Tell her to rest," Morrison continued. "Keep her warm and hydrated, And if she's not better in 3 days, get her to a hospital in Helena. And if she can't afford a hospital, the doctor's expression grew sad. Then pray. Ethan left without responding. He'd given up on prayer the day he'd buried his family. The ride back was worse than the ride out. The storm had intensified, and the temperature had dropped to the point where he couldn't feel his feet in the stirrups. His horse struggled through drifts that came up to its chest. More than once, Ethan considered stopping, finding shelter, waiting for dawn. But he'd made a promise to a little girl who'd already been disappointed too many times. So he kept going. Dawn was breaking, gray and reluctant, when he finally saw the sagging outline of the Miller house through the snow. Smoke still rose from the chimney. That was something, at least. He'd half expected to arrive and find the place dark and cold, the ending he'd come to expect from every story he touched. Lily must have been watching, because the door flew open before he'd even dismounted. She stood in the doorway, backlit by firelight, and he could see her whole body sag with relief. "You came back," she breathed. "You really came back." "Said I would." Ethan climbed stiffly from the saddle, every muscle screaming protest. "How's your mother?" "Same. Maybe a little worse." Lily's voice trembled. "She keeps asking if you're coming. I kept telling her you would, but I was so scared. I'm here now." Ethan pulled the wrapped medicine from his saddlebag. "Take this." Dr. Morrison said 3 times a day, mixed with warm water. Lily took the package like it was made of gold, her eyes wide. Then before Ethan could react, she'd thrown her arms around his waist and was hugging him with the desperate strength of a child who'd been holding the world together by herself for far too long. Ethan froze. He couldn't remember the last time someone had hugged him, couldn't remember the last time he'd allowed it. Every instinct screamed at him to pull away, to maintain the distance that kept him safe. But Lily was crying into his coat, and her small body was shaking, and he found his hand moving almost of its own accord to rest lightly on her head. "It's all right," he said, his voice rough. "It's going to be all right." It was a lie, probably, but it was the kind of lie that people needed sometimes. Inside, the house was marginally warmer than before. Emma sat on the floor near the fire, playing with a faceless cloth doll. She looked up when Ethan entered and gave him a shy smile that hit him somewhere in the vicinity of his chest. Rachel was awake, propped up on pillows, looking somehow both better and worse than she had the day before. Her fever had broken, leaving her pale and shaking, but her eyes were clearer. "Mr. Cross," she said. "Lily said you went for medicine." "Yes, ma'am." He handed the package to Lily, who was already heating water. "Dr. Morrison says you need to rest, drink plenty of fluids." "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't need thanks." Rachel studied him with those storm-gray eyes. "Why are you doing this? For people you don't even know?" It was a fair question. Ethan wished he had a fair answer. "Your daughters asked for help," he said finally. "Seemed wrong to walk away." "Most people would have." "I'm not most people." The words came out more bitter than he'd intended. Rachel's expression softened. "No, I don't suppose you are." She paused, then asked quietly, "Will you stay? Just until I can get back on my feet? I can't pay you much, but no." The word came out too fast, too sharp. Lily flinched and Emma's smile faded. Ethan forced himself to soften his tone. "I mean, I can't. I don't stay places." "Just a few days," Rachel pressed. "Please, the girls need, I need." Another coughing fit seized her, and when it passed, there were tears in her eyes. Not from pain, Ethan realized, from fear, from the desperate knowledge that she was all her daughters had, and she was failing them. "There are things you should know," Rachel said when she could speak again. "About this town. About my husband. About why people won't help us. Not my business." "It might be if you stay." Ethan looked at Lily, who was preparing the medicine with careful concentration, at Emma, who'd returned to her play but kept shooting hopeful glances in his direction, at Rachel, who was fighting just to breathe but still trying to protect her children. He thought about his horse outside, saddled and ready, about the empty road stretching away in every direction, about the nothing he'd been heading toward for 3 years. 3 days? He heard himself say. "I'll stay 3 days. Make sure the medicine is working, then I'm gone." Lily's face lit up. Emma clapped her small hands. Rachel closed her eyes, and a single tear traced down her cheek. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan turned away, ostensibly to tend to his horse, actually to escape the weight of their gratitude. 3 days. He could manage 3 days. It wasn't getting involved. It wasn't staying. It was just helping. For a little while. He told himself that right up until Sunday arrived. The trouble came with the church bells. Ethan had spent the past 2 days doing odd jobs around the house, fixing the roof, chopping wood, replacing broken window panes. Small things that needed doing and that Rachel couldn't do herself. The girls shadowed him constantly, Emma mostly silent, but watching everything with solemn eyes, Lily chattering to fill the quiet. He learned things. That their father had been named Thomas, and he'd worked at the bank before he died. That Lily's favorite color was yellow because it reminded her of summer. That Emma hadn't spoken more than a few words since the day their father's body was brought home. That Rachel had been a school teacher before she married, and she still tried to teach the girls their letters when she had the strength. He learned other things too, darker things, from the way Rachel flinched at certain questions or the carefully neutral tone Lily used when speaking about her father's death. Thomas Miller hadn't died in an accident. Ethan would stake his badge, the one he'd left in a desk drawer 3 years ago, on that certainty. And whatever had really happened, Victor Hale was at the center of it. Not your business, he reminded himself constantly. 3 days. That's all. But Sunday morning, Victor Hale made it his business. The sound of horses drew Ethan outside. 4 riders approached the house, moving with the casual confidence of men who knew they held all the power. At their head rode a man who could only be Hale himself, well-dressed, well-fed, with the kind of face that smiled even when there was nothing to smile about. Behind Ethan, he heard Lily gasp. Rachel appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a blanket despite her fever, her face pale. "Victor," she said, and her voice shook despite her obvious effort to keep it steady. "Rachel." Hale's smile widened. "I'm glad to see you're still alive. Though I have to say, you're looking a bit rough. What do you want?" "You know what I want. It's Sunday. Your time's up." Hale's eyes slid to Ethan. "Who's this?" "Nobody," Ethan said before Rachel could answer. "Just passing through." "Passing through?" Hale's tone suggested he didn't believe that for a second. "Well, nobody? You might want to keep on passing. This is a private matter between Mrs. Miller and myself." "Didn't look private," Ethan observed. "You brought 3 friends." The men flanking Hale shifted in their saddles. Ethan recognized the type. Hired muscle, comfortable with violence, used to people backing down. He'd arrested 100 men just like them over the years. "Mrs. Miller owes the bank a considerable sum," Hale said. "Her late husband's debts. Since she can't pay, the property reverts to me, as of today." "That's not how debt works," Rachel said, her voice stronger now. "The law says whatever I tell the sheriff it says," Hale interrupted, "and the sheriff agrees that you need to vacate this property, today." "In the middle of winter, with 2 children and pneumonia?" Ethan took a step forward. "That's not just cruel, it's murder." Hale's smile never wavered. "As I said, this doesn't concern you. Unless you're planning to pay Mrs. Miller's debts?" He named a sum that made Rachel close her eyes in despair. Ethan didn't have that kind of money, didn't have any money, really, beyond what he'd spent on medicine. But he'd seen this play before, recognized the script. "How much did her husband really owe?" he asked quietly. "I just told you. How much did he really owe before you added your special interest rates and fees?" Hale's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Mr. Miller signed contracts, legal contracts. If he didn't read the terms—" "Thomas read everything," Rachel said suddenly. "He was careful, meticulous. That's why—" She stopped, but the words hung in the air between them. "That's why he died." "You have until sunset," Hale said, pulling his reins. "After that, my men will remove you, by force if necessary." He looked at Ethan. "All of you." They rode away and Ethan stood in the yard watching them go, his mind working. This wasn't just about debt or property. Hale had killed to get this land. He was certain of it now. The question was why? What made this particular piece of ground worth murder? Mr. Cross. He turned. Rachel stood in the doorway, leaning heavily on the frame, Lily and Emma pressed against her sides. You should go, she said quietly. This isn't your fight. Maybe not. You don't owe us anything. You got the medicine. You fixed the roof. That's more than anyone else did. Where will you go? Rachel's laugh was bitter. I don't know. Maybe the church will take us in. Maybe... She stopped, because they both knew the church wouldn't help any more than anyone else had. In a town owned by Victor Hale, there was no sanctuary. Ethan looked at the girls. Emma had her face buried in her mother's skirt. Lily was trying not to cry, her small jaw set with desperate determination. Please be our daddy today. 3 days, he'd said. 3 days, and then he'd leave. The smart play was to mount his horse right now and ride away. Let these people face their own problems. He'd learned the hard way that you couldn't save everyone, that trying only led to more pain. But when he closed his eyes, he didn't see Rachel and her daughters. He saw his wife, Sarah, saw his son, Michael, saw the cabin they'd built together, the life they'd planned, the future that had died in a single night of violence while he'd been 20 miles away, wearing his badge, enforcing laws that hadn't protected the people who mattered most. He'd run from that failure for 3 years, run from the guilt, the grief, the crushing knowledge that when his family needed him most, he hadn't been there. Maybe he couldn't fix the past, but he could, perhaps, keep it from repeating here. No, he said. Rachel blinked. No what? No, I'm not leaving. And no, you're not being thrown off this land. Ethan turned to face the house, his decision made. We have until sunset. That gives us about 8 hours. 8 hours to do what? Lily asked. Ethan looked down at her and saw hope warring with fear in her young face. He saw Emma peeking out from behind her mother's skirt. He saw Rachel, sick and exhausted and still fighting with everything she had. And he made a promise he knew he might not be able to keep. 8 hours to find out what your father knew. 8 hours to figure out why Hale wants this land badly enough to kill for it. And 8 hours to make sure that when those men come back, they find something they're not expecting. What's that? Rachel whispered. Ethan's smile was cold and sharp, the expression of a man who'd been a lawman long before he'd been a drifter, who'd seen 1,000 Victor Hales and knew exactly how they operated. Resistance. The first thing Ethan needed was information, and the only place to start was with what Thomas Miller had left behind. Rachel watched from the bed as he searched the small house, moving carefully through the few possessions the family owned. Lily hovered nearby, wringing her hands. Mama already looked, the girl said. After Papa died, she looked everywhere. I'm sure she did. Ethan pulled out a drawer, examined the underside. But sometimes people hide things in places that don't make sense to anyone but themselves. What are you looking for? Whatever your father found that got him killed. The bluntness of it made Lily flinch, but she didn't argue. She was too smart for her age, that girl. She knew the truth, even if the adults around her kept pretending otherwise. Rachel's voice came weak from the bed. Thomas kept a journal. He wrote everything down, numbers, names, dates, but I couldn't find it after he died. I thought maybe whoever... She couldn't finish the sentence. They would have taken it, Ethan agreed, if they were smart, but people make mistakes when they're in a hurry. He moved to the small desk where Thomas had apparently worked. Basic furniture, nothing special. He pulled out each drawer completely, checking for false bottoms, hidden compartments. Nothing. Emma watched him from her spot on the floor, her doll clutched tight. She hadn't said a word all morning, but her eyes tracked his every movement. Your papa, Ethan said to her gently. Did he have a favorite spot? Somewhere he liked to sit, maybe? Or hide things during games? Emma's eyes widened slightly. She looked at her mother, then at Lily, then back at Ethan. Finally, she pointed one small finger toward the fireplace. The fireplace? Ethan walked over, examined the stones. He hid things in the chimney? Emma shook her head. She slipped off the floor and walked to the hearth, her movements deliberate. Then she knelt down and pressed on a particular stone at the base, one that looked no different from any of the others. The stone shifted inward with a soft click. Well, I'll be damned, Ethan breathed. Behind the stone was a hollow space, and in that space was a leather-bound journal wrapped in oilcloth. Ethan pulled it out carefully, his heart beating faster. Emma looked up at him with solemn eyes. "Good girl," he said quietly. "Very good girl." Rachel had struggled to a sitting position. "Emma knew? All this time?" Lily knelt beside her sister. "Why didn't you tell us?" Emma's voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. "Papa said it was our secret. He said not to tell unless someone came who could help." She looked at Ethan. "You came to help." The trust in those words hit Ethan harder than any blow. He turned away, ostensibly to examine the journal, actually to compose himself. The journal was exactly what he'd hoped for, and worse than he'd feared. Thomas Miller had been methodical, recording everything he discovered while working at Hale's bank. Loans that didn't exist on the official books, foreclosures on properties where the debt had already been paid, money transferred to accounts in Denver and San Francisco. But more than that, deaths. 6 men in the past 3 years who'd opposed Hale, all of them meeting convenient accidents. And at the center of it all, a pattern. Hale wasn't just stealing money. He was acquiring land along a specific corridor, a path that cut through the valley in a nearly straight line. "What is it?" Rachel asked. "What did Thomas find?" Ethan flipped through the pages, his lawman's mind piecing together the puzzle. "Your husband discovered that Hale's been systematically acquiring land. Not random properties, specific ones, all in a line." He traced his finger along the map Thomas had drawn. "Like he knows something about this land that nobody else does." "What could be so valuable?" "Water rights, maybe. Or mineral deposits." Ethan studied the map more carefully. "Or a railroad spur." Rachel's breath caught. "The Northern Pacific. There were surveyors through here last summer, but they said the route was too difficult, that they'd go through Helena instead." "What if they lied?" Ethan looked up. "What if someone paid them to say the route wasn't feasible, then bought up all the land along the real route for pennies on the dollar?" "That's fraud. That's exactly the kind of thing that gets people killed." Ethan closed the journal. "Your husband figured it out. He was going to expose Hale, wasn't he?" Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He said he had evidence. He said he was going to the federal marshal in Helena, but the night before he was supposed to leave..." Her voice broke. Lily finished for her. "They said his horse threw him, that he hit his head on a rock. But Papa was the best rider in the county. He wouldn't have fallen." "No," Ethan agreed. "He wouldn't have." He looked at the journal in his hands, felt the weight of it. This was evidence. Real evidence. The kind that could bring down a man like Victor Hale. But evidence only mattered if you lived long enough to present it. And they had maybe 7 hours before Hale's men came back. "I need to go into town," Ethan said. "That's insane," Rachel protested. "Hale owns that town. You'll be walking into a trap." "Maybe. But I need to know what we're up against, how many men Hale has, who might be willing to stand up to him if they had a reason." He tucked the journal into his coat. "And I need to let people know this evidence exists. If something happens to me, at least someone will know the truth." "If something happens to you, we're as good as dead." Rachel's voice was flat. "You understand that, don't you?" Ethan did understand it. That's what made the next few hours so crucial. "Lily," he said, turning to the girl, "I need you to do something for me. Can you shoot?" "Papa taught me, with his old rifle." "Get it. If anyone comes to this house who isn't me, anyone at all, I want you to fire a warning shot. Not at them, into the air, just enough to scare them off. Can you do that?" Lily's jaw set with determination. "Yes, sir." "Good. Keep the doors locked. Don't open them for anyone." He looked at Rachel. "You have my word I'll be back before sunset." "Your word?" Rachel laughed bitterly. "I don't even know you." "No," Ethan agreed, "but I'm all you've got." The ride into Salvation Ridge took 20 minutes, and Ethan used every second to plan. He wasn't a lawman anymore, had no authority, no backup, no legal standing whatsoever. But he'd learned over the years that authority wasn't always about badges. Sometimes it was about knowledge, about leverage, about making people believe you had power whether you did or not. The town was quiet when he arrived, that particular Sunday silence that felt more like fear than peace. A few people moved along the main street, but they kept their heads down, their business brisk. No one lingered, no one talked. Ethan tied his horse outside the general store and walked in. The proprietor, a thin man with nervous hands, looked up from his counter and immediately looked away. "Help you?" The words were directed at the floor. "Need some supplies, ammunition, lamp oil, dried beans." Ethan laid bills on the counter. "And information." "Don't know nothing about nothing. Didn't ask yet." The proprietor finally looked up and Ethan saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. "Mister, I don't know who you are or what you're doing in this town, but the best advice I can give you is to get back on your horse and ride. Today." "Can't do that." "Then you're a fool." "Probably." Ethan leaned on the counter. "Victor Hale. How many men does he have?" "I said, I don't know nothing. You know. Everybody knows. They're just too scared to say." Ethan's voice hardened. "Thomas Miller. You knew him?" Something flickered in the proprietor's expression. Grief, maybe. Or guilt. "Tom was a good man. He was murdered." "That's a dangerous word." "It's the truth." Ethan pulled the journal out just far enough for the man to see it. "And I can prove it. The question is whether anyone in this town has the spine to care." The proprietor stared at the journal like it was a snake. "Put that away. If Hale's men see, I want them to see. I want Hale to know that what Thomas Miller found didn't die with him." Ethan tucked the journal back into his coat. "How many men?" The proprietor was silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, 5, maybe 6 who'll do his dirty work. Another dozen who'll look the other way. The sheriff's in his pocket. So's the mayor, the bank manager, the doc. Hell, half the town owes him money, or favors, or both. Anyone who might stand against him? Not openly. Not anymore. The man began gathering the supplies Ethan had requested, his movements jerky with fear. There's some who hate what he's done, some who knew Tom, who know the truth about how he died. But hate ain't enough when you got a family to feed and a mortgage Hale can call in on a whim. What about the law, federal marshals? 2 days' ride to Helena, and that's in good weather. Even if you made it, even if they believed you, Hale would have warning. He'd destroy the evidence, kill the witnesses, and by the time anyone official arrived, there'd be nothing but your word against his. The proprietor pushed the wrapped supplies across the counter. "You're one man. He's got this whole town by the throat. You can't win." "Maybe not." Ethan gathered the supplies. "But I can make him bleed." He was turning to leave when the proprietor said, "The church. If you're looking for people who might help, try Pastor Matthews. He's got no love for Hale, and he's one of the few men in town who doesn't owe the bank money." It wasn't much, but it was something. The church sat at the edge of town, a simple white building with a modest steeple. Ethan found the pastor in the cemetery behind it, tending to graves with careful attention. He was younger than Ethan expected, maybe 40, with the kind of weathered face that came from genuinely caring about people's burdens. "Pastor Matthews?" The man looked up. "That's me. Don't believe we've met." "Ethan Cross. I'm helping Rachel Miller." Something shifted in Matthews' expression, respect mixed with concern. "How is Rachel? I've tried to visit, but Victor Hale made it clear you shouldn't." Matthews' jaw tightened. "Mr. Hale suggested that my time might be better spent attending to my regular congregation. He also mentioned that the church's mortgage comes up for renewal next month." "And you believed him?" "I believed he'd foreclose on this building without a second thought." Matthews set down his gardening tools. "I'm ashamed to say I chose the church over the family. Told myself I could do more good here, help more people. But the truth is, I was scared." "You should be scared. Hale's killed 6 men that we know of." Matthews closed his eyes. "I know. Tom came to me before he died. Told me what he'd found. I told him to take it to the authorities, to not try to be a hero." His voice broke. "I should have done more. Should have stood with him. You can stand now." Ethan pulled out the journal. Thomas kept records. Everything Hale's done, everyone he's hurt, all the evidence we'd need to bring him down. But I can't get it to the federal marshals alone. And Rachel and her girls are going to be thrown off their land in, he checked the sun's position, about 6 hours unless something changes. "What are you asking me to do?" Ring the church bell. Call a town meeting. Let people see this evidence. Matthews stared at him. That's suicide. Hale will kill you. Kill me. Probably kill Rachel and her children just to make a point. Maybe. But what's the alternative? Let him keep doing this? Let him own this whole town, every soul in it, until there's nothing left but fear? Ethan's voice was hard. You wanted to do more. Here's your chance. For a long moment, Matthews was silent. Ethan could see the war playing out behind his eyes. Duty versus survival, faith versus fear. Then the pastor looked down at the graves he'd been tending. Jim Carpenter, he said, pointing to one, opposed Hale's acquisition of the water rights, drowned in what they called a fishing accident. He moved to another grave. Sarah Chen. Her husband refused to sell his land. She was killed in a fire they blamed on a knocked-over lamp. Another grave. These are Tom Miller's parents. They died within a month of each other after Tom started asking questions at the bank. Heart failure, the doctor said. Matthews looked up, and there were tears in his eyes. How many more graves before someone stands up? That's what I'm asking. The pastor took a deep breath. Then he walked toward the church. Give me an hour to spread the word. I'll ring the bell at 4 o'clock. That gives you 2 hours before Hale's deadline. Will people come? Some will. The ones who've lost family, lost property, lost hope. Whether it's enough, Matthews shrugged. I guess we'll find out. Ethan spent the next hour preparing. He bought more ammunition from the general store, along with lamp oil and anything else that might be useful. The proprietor didn't ask questions, just filled the order with shaking hands. Word was already spreading, Ethan could tell. People watched him from windows. Conversations stopped when he passed. By the time the church bell began to ring, a crowd had gathered. Not the whole town, nowhere near it, but maybe 30 or 40 people. Men and women who looked worn down by fear, but not quite broken. People who'd lost something to Victor Hale and were tired of losing. Ethan stood on the church steps, the journal in his hands. Pastor Matthews stood beside him. Lily had insisted on coming despite Ethan's protests, leaving Emma with Rachel. The girl stood at his other side, her small face fierce with determination. Most of you don't know me, Ethan began. Name's Ethan Cross. I used to be a federal lawman, though I gave that up some years back. I came to this town by accident, and I'm leaving soon. But before I go, there's something you all need to know. He held up the journal. Thomas Miller was murdered 6 weeks ago. Not because he fell from his horse. Not because of any accident. He was killed because he discovered what Victor Hale has been doing to this town. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ethan saw fear, anger, and something that might have been hope. For 3 years, Hale has been acquiring land along a specific route. He's done it through fraud, through manipulation, through calling in debts that don't exist, and foreclosing on properties that should never have been taken. He's done it through intimidation and violence. Ethan's voice rang out clear and hard. And he's done it through murder. A man in the crowd shouted, "You got proof of that?" "I do." Ethan opened the journal, began reading. Names, dates, amounts. Every shady deal, every fraudulent loan, every suspicious death. Thomas Miller had been thorough, had documented everything with the precision of a man who knew he was building a case. The crowd grew silent as Ethan read. He saw faces change, saw the moment when fear began to transform into anger, saw people recognize the pattern, see their own losses as part of a larger crime. The Northern Pacific Railroad is coming through this valley, Ethan continued, not through Helena like they claimed, but right through here. Hale knew. He bribed the surveyors to lie, then bought up all the land along the route for a fraction of its worth. When the railroad comes through, he'll make millions, all of it built on theft and murder. "What do you expect us to do about it?" a woman called out. "Hale owns the sheriff, owns the bank. He's got armed men." "I expect you to decide whether you're going to keep living in fear or whether you're going to take your town back." Ethan's voice was hard. "In about an hour, Hale's men are going to try to throw Rachel Miller and her daughters off their land, the last piece of property Hale needs to complete his holdings. I'm going to stop them. The question is whether I'm doing it alone." The crowd erupted in nervous conversation. Ethan saw people arguing, saw fear warring with anger. Matthews stepped forward. "I'm standing with him," the pastor said. I failed Tom Miller. I won't fail his family. For a moment, nobody moved. Then an old man near the front stepped forward. Ethan recognized him from the general store. My son died in one of Hale's accidents, the old man said. I'm in. A woman joined him. He took my husband's land, said we owed more than the property was worth. We've been living in a shack ever since. One by one, people stepped forward. Not everyone. Maybe half the crowd stayed back, too afraid or too beaten down to risk what little they had left. But the ones who stepped forward had fire in their eyes. We need weapons, someone said. And a plan, added another. Ethan was about to respond when he heard the sound of hoofbeats. A lot of them. The crowd turned as a group of riders appeared on the main street. 8 men, all armed, led by Victor Hale himself. Hale reined in his horse at the edge of the crowd. His smile was gone, replaced by something cold and dangerous. Well, he said, quite the gathering. Pastor Matthews, I'm surprised at you, and disappointed. The disappointment's mutual, Matthews replied. Hale's eyes found Ethan. You're making a mistake, friend, a very expensive mistake. The only mistake was thinking you'd get away with it forever. Ethan held up the journal. It's over, Hale. Everyone here knows what you've done. This evidence is going to the federal marshals in Helena, along with testimony from everyone you've hurt. Is that right? Hale's smile returned, but there was nothing pleasant about it. And who exactly is going to deliver it? You? You'll never make it out of town. I'll have my men hunt you down before you get 5 miles. Maybe, but it won't matter. Ethan's voice was calm. Because I'm not the only one who's read it. Pastor Matthews has read it. Mrs. Chen over there has read it. Half this crowd has seen it. You can kill me, but you can't kill everyone. And the moment you try, the moment you prove through violence what we all already know, this whole thing falls apart. For the first time, Ethan saw uncertainty in Hale's expression. The man was used to controlling situations through fear, but fear only worked when people were isolated, when they believed they were alone. A crowd was different. A crowd could become a mob, and mobs were unpredictable. You're bluffing, Hale said, but his voice lacked conviction. Try me. The 2 men stared at each other, and Ethan could see Hale calculating odds, weighing options. The banker was smart enough to know that gunning down a crowd in broad daylight in front of witnesses was different from arranging accidents in the dark. Finally, Hale said, Fine. You want to play this out? Let's play. But understand something. By sundown, Rachel Miller is off that land. That's not negotiable. If she's not gone voluntarily, my men will remove her. And if you or anyone else interferes, well, he smiled. Accidents happen. They do, Ethan agreed. Thomas Miller had an accident. Jim Carpenter had an accident. Sarah Chen had an accident. Funny how all these accidents happen to people who get in your way. Hale's expression darkened. Careful, friend. I'm not your friend, and I'm not careful. Ethan took a step forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave Rachel Miller alone. You're going to forgive whatever imaginary debt you claim she owes. And you're going to stop using fear to control this town. Or what? Or this journal goes to Helena, along with testimony from everyone here, and you spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Hale actually laughed at that. You think the law cares about a few dead farmers and some questionable loans? You think anyone in Helena gives a damn about what happens in Salvation Ridge? I think the railroad company will care when they find out their survey was fraudulent. I think the territorial governor will care when he finds out about the bribery and corruption. And I think the newspapers will care about a story of a small town standing up to a murderous banker. Ethan's voice was hard as iron. You've kept power by keeping people isolated and afraid. But the moment the light shines on what you've done, the moment people realize they're not alone, your power disappears. For a long moment, silence hung over the street. Hale's men shifted nervously, hands near their weapons but uncertain. The townspeople watched, barely breathing. Then Hale spoke, and his voice was soft and deadly. You've made your choice then. All of you. Remember that when the consequences come. He yanked his horse's reins. Sundown, Mr. Cross. We'll see how brave you are when bullets start flying. The riders wheeled and galloped away, leaving dust and tension in their wake. The crowd erupted in anxious conversation. Some people were already backing away, fear reasserting itself now that the moment had passed. "What have we done?" someone asked. "He'll destroy us all." "He was destroying you already," Ethan said, "just slowly enough that you didn't notice." He looked at Matthews. "I need to get back to the Miller place. Make sure Rachel and the girls are safe." "I'm coming with you," the pastor said. "Me too," said the old man whose son had died. One by one, about a dozen people volunteered. Not an army, but it was something. Ethan divided them into groups, some to watch the roads, some to spread word to neighboring towns, some to ride toward Helena with copies of the journal's most damning pages. By the time he made it back to the Miller house, the sun was low in the sky, maybe an hour until sunset. Rachel met him at the door, Emma clinging to her skirt. "We heard the church bell," she said. "What happened?" Ethan told her. About the meeting, about Hale's threats, about the townspeople who'd finally found the courage to stand. Rachel listened, her face pale. "He'll come," she said when Ethan finished. "He'll come with all his men, and people will die, and it'll be my fault." "It's not your fault. It's his." Ethan checked the rifle Lily had retrieved from its hiding place. "Your husband started this fight because it was the right thing to do. I'm finishing it for the same reason. You barely know us. Doesn't matter." "Why?" Rachel's voice broke. "Why are you doing this?" "Really?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because 3 years ago, I wasn't there when my family needed me. I was 20 miles away, wearing a badge, enforcing laws that didn't save them. I've been running from that failure ever since." He looked at her, then at Lily and Emma. "Maybe I can't fix what happened to them, but I can make sure it doesn't happen to you." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "That's not your burden to carry." "Maybe not, but I'm carrying it anyway." The sun was touching the horizon when they heard the horses. A lot of horses. Ethan positioned himself at the window, rifle ready. Behind him, Lily held Emma close. Rachel had insisted on being out of bed, pale and shaking, but determined to face whatever came. But when the riders appeared, it wasn't what Ethan had expected. Victor Hale led the group, that much was predictable. But behind him weren't just his usual hired guns. There were more men, many more. At least 20 riders, all armed. And at the rear, bound and bloody, was Pastor Matthews. Ethan's grip tightened on the rifle as he watched the riders approach through the gathering dusk. Pastor Matthews sagged in his saddle, his face swollen and bloodied, hands bound behind his back. The message was clear. This is what happens to those who stand against Victor Hale. "Stay back from the windows," Ethan said quietly to Rachel and the girls. His voice was calm, but his mind was racing, calculating odds that kept getting worse. 20 armed men against one former lawman, a sick woman, and 2 children. The math didn't work. Hale raised his hand and the riders stopped about 30 yards from the house, spreading out in a loose semicircle that blocked any escape route. The banker sat tall in his saddle, his expensive coat and hat incongruous with the violence radiating from the men around him. "Mr. Cross," Hale called out, "I believe we had an agreement about sundown." Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle held loosely but ready. "We didn't have an agreement. You made a threat. There's a difference." "Semantics," Hale gestured to Matthews. "The good pastor here tried to spread sedition through my town, tried to turn good people against their benefactor. I'm afraid that required correction." "You mean you beat a man of the cloth because he told the truth?" "I mean, I reminded him of his place." Hale's smile was cold. "Just as I'm about to remind you of yours. You're a drifter, Mr. Cross. Nobody. You have no authority here, no standing, no right to interfere in business that doesn't concern you. Murder concerns me. Theft concerns me. Corruption concerns me." Big words from a man who gave up his badge. Hale leaned forward in his saddle. "Oh, yes? I made some inquiries about you this afternoon. Ethan Cross, former deputy marshal, resigned his position 3 years ago after some personal tragedy. Been drifting ever since, drinking away his guilt in towns he can barely remember. Did I miss anything?" Ethan felt the words like punches, but kept his expression neutral. "You missed the part where I'm still a better man than you'll ever be." "Perhaps, but better men don't win. Smart men win. Ruthless men win." Hale gestured to his riders. and men with superior numbers win. You have one rifle and a dying woman. I have 20 armed men and all the time in the world. How do you imagine this ends? With you in chains or in a grave? I'm flexible on which." Hale actually laughed. "You've got spine, I'll give you that. But spine doesn't stop bullets." His expression hardened. "Final offer. Walk away right now. Leave Montana, never come back, and I'll let you live. The woman and her brats can find shelter elsewhere. I'm not unreasonable. No, you're just a killer and a thief hiding behind respectability. Last chance, Cross. Go to hell." Hale's smile vanished. He nodded to one of his men who raised a rifle and fired. The bullet slammed into the porch railing inches from Ethan's head, sending splinters flying. Emma screamed inside the house. "Next one goes through your chest unless you—" But the crack of a rifle cut him off. One of Hale's men jerked in his saddle and fell, clutching his shoulder. The shot had come from behind them, from the road leading back to town. Ethan's heart leaped as he saw figures emerging from the twilight. A dozen at first, then more. Men and women on foot and horseback, many carrying weapons. The old man from the general store was there, along with the woman whose husband had lost his land. Other faces Ethan recognized from the town meeting, and some he didn't. At their head, limping but determined, was the proprietor from the general store, holding a shotgun like he knew how to use it. "You're done, Hale," the proprietor called out. "We're done being afraid of you." Hale wheeled his horse, his face contorted with rage. "You fools! I'll destroy every one of you. I'll call in every debt, foreclose on every property." "You'll do nothing," a new voice interrupted. This one came from the opposite direction, and Ethan turned to see more riders approaching. But these weren't townspeople. They wore badges. 3 federal marshals, led by a gray-haired man with a face carved from granite, rode up to the house. The lead marshal looked at Hale with the kind of cold assessment that came from years of dealing with men who believed themselves above the law. "Victor Hale?" the marshal said. It wasn't really a question. "Who's asking?" "Marshal James Thornton, United States Marshal Service. We've received some disturbing reports about your activities in this town. Reports of fraud, corruption, and murder." "Reports from whom? That drunk?" Hale jabbed a finger at Ethan. "Or these ungrateful wretches who don't understand the first thing about business?" "Reports from multiple sources, actually, including the Northern Pacific Railroad, who were very interested to learn that their survey data had been falsified." Thornton pulled a document from his coat. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of bribery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." Hale's face went white, then red. "This is outrageous. I have rights. I have lawyers. You can't just—" "We can, and we are." Thornton gestured to his deputies. "Mr. Hale, you're under arrest." For a moment, Ethan thought Hale might actually comply. But then the banker's hand dropped to the pistol at his belt, and everything happened at once. One of Hale's men, a gunfighter with cold eyes, drew and fired at the marshals. The shot went wild, but it was enough. Suddenly, everyone was shooting, the air filled with muzzle flashes and the sharp crack of gunfire. Ethan dove back into the house, shielding Rachel and the girls with his body as bullets tore through the walls. Outside, the battle raged in chaotic bursts. Men shouted, horses screamed, and the steady boom of rifles echoed across the valley. "Stay down," Ethan ordered. He crawled to the window, risked a glance outside. The scene was chaos. Hale's men had scattered, some taking cover behind their horses, others returning fire at the marshals and townspeople. Bodies already littered the ground. Ethan couldn't tell how many or whose side they'd been on. He saw Marshal Thornton take cover behind a water trough, methodically returning fire. Saw the old man from the general store go down clutching his leg. Saw one of Hale's hired guns get knocked from his saddle by a shotgun blast. And in the middle of it all, Victor Hale sat on his horse like a general surveying a battlefield, shouting orders and drawing his pistol. Ethan lined up his shot carefully. At this range, in this light, with adrenaline making his hands shake, it would be easy to miss. But he'd been a lawman for 15 years before he'd given it up, and some skills never fully faded. He squeezed the trigger. The shot took Hale in the shoulder, spinning him in the saddle. The banker screamed and grabbed his wounded arm, his pistol falling to the ground. His horse, spooked by the gunfire and its rider's sudden movement, reared and bolted. Hale, already off balance, couldn't hold on. He fell hard, landing in the dirt with a sickening thud. For a moment he didn't move, and Ethan thought the fall might have killed him. Then Hale stirred, trying to crawl toward his fallen pistol. Marshal Thornton was there in seconds, kicking the gun away and pressing his own pistol to Hale's head. "Don't move. Don't even breathe wrong." The fight went out of the remaining gunmen quickly after that. Seeing their employer down and bleeding, facing federal marshals and angry townspeople who'd finally found their courage, most of them threw down their weapons. A few tried to run and were quickly rounded up. Within minutes, it was over. Ethan stepped out onto the porch, rifle still ready, scanning for threats. The yard was a mess. Wounded men groaning, horses scattered, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. But it was over. They'd survived. Marshal Thornton approached, holstering his weapon. Up close, Ethan could see the man was probably in his 60s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent a lifetime enforcing the law in hard places. "You Cross?" the marshal asked. "I am. Got your message about 3 hours ago. Rode hard to get here." Thornton glanced at the chaos around them. "Looks like we almost arrived too late." "How'd you get the message?" "Young fellow named Tom Jameson showed up at my office in Helena with pages from a journal. Said you'd sent him with evidence of corruption in Salvation Ridge." Thornton pulled out the copied pages, now crumpled and stained. "Damning stuff if it's authentic." "It is. Thomas Miller documented everything before Hale had him killed." "Miller. Right. We'll need to talk about that." Thornton looked past Ethan to where Rachel stood in the doorway, the girls pressed against her sides. "That the widow?" "Yes, sir. Rachel Miller and her daughters, Lily and Emma." Thornton removed his hat respectfully. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for your loss, and I'm sorry it took this long for the law to take notice. Sometimes we fail the people we're supposed to protect." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "You came. That's what matters. We came because Mr. Cross here made sure we couldn't ignore it anymore." Thornton turned back to Ethan. "You did good work, son. Risky as hell, but good." Ethan shook his head. "I just brought the evidence to light. Thomas Miller did the real work, and these people—" He gestured to the townspeople who were tending to the wounded and securing the prisoners. "They're the ones who found the courage to stand up. Still took someone to lead them." Thornton's eyes were shrewd. "You ever think about taking up the badge again? We could use men like you." The offer hung in the air, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. 3 years ago, Ethan would have said yes without hesitation. But that was before. Before he'd lost everything. Before he'd learned that badges and oaths couldn't protect the people who mattered most. "I don't know it," he said honestly. I gave it up for a reason." "Reasons change. Think about it." Thornton replaced his hat. "Right now, though, we've got a crime scene to process and prisoners to transport. You'll need to give a full statement, probably testify at trial." "I'll do whatever's needed." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The wounded were treated, 3 townspeople with minor injuries, 2 of Hale's men with serious ones, and Pastor Matthews, who turned out to have a concussion and several broken ribs but was otherwise stable. The dead were counted, 4 of Hale's gunmen and heartbreakingly 1 townsperson, a young man who'd been shot defending his neighbors. Hale himself was barely conscious, his shoulder wound serious enough that the marshals had to send for the doctor from Silver Falls. While they waited, Thornton and his deputies began taking statements, building a case that would ensure Hale never saw freedom again. Ethan found himself sitting on the Miller house porch as full darkness fell, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him shaky and aware of how close they'd all come to dying. If the marshals had arrived 5 minutes later, if the townspeople hadn't found their courage, if any of a dozen small moments had gone differently. "Mr. Cross?" He looked up. Emma stood in front of him, her doll clutched tight, her small face serious. She studied him for a long moment, then carefully climbed onto the porch and sat beside him, not quite touching, but close. For a while they sat in silence, watching the activity in the yard. Then Emma's small hand found his, her fingers cold and fragile. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being our daddy today." The words broke something in Ethan's chest, some wall he'd built to keep the pain contained. He found himself crying, silent tears that ran down his face, unchecked, 3 years of grief finally finding release. Emma didn't pull away. She just sat there, holding his hand, a small anchor in the storm of his emotions. Eventually, Rachel came out and found them like that. She sat on Ethan's other side, her own exhaustion evident in every movement. "Marshall Thornton says we can stay," she said quietly. "Says the property is legally ours, that all of Hale's foreclosures will be reviewed. We won't have to leave." "That's good. Lily's putting Emma to bed. She wanted me to tell you good night." Ethan nodded, not trusting his voice. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You're planning to leave, aren't you, when all this is done?" "I don't know." It was the truth. He honestly didn't know anymore. "You don't have to, you know. Leave, I mean." Rachel's voice was soft. "There's work here. The ranch needs fixing up, and with Hale gone, the town will need rebuilding. We could use someone like you." "Someone broken and running from ghosts?" "Someone strong enough to stand when everyone else wanted to run. Someone who kept promises even when it would have been easier to break them." She looked at him directly. "Someone my daughters already see as a hero." "I'm not a hero." "You are to them. To me." Rachel's hand found his free one. Emma still held the other. "I know what loss feels like, Ethan. I know what it's like to have your whole world ripped away, to feel like the person you were died along with the people you loved. But I also know that life doesn't stop just because we want it to. We can either let the pain define us, or we can choose to build something new from the ruins." Ethan thought about his wife Sarah, about his son Michael, about the life he'd lost and the 3 years he'd spent running from the memory of it. He told himself it was about protecting others, about not failing again, but the truth was simpler and more selfish. He'd been afraid. Afraid to care, afraid to connect, afraid to risk loving and losing again. But these people, this sick woman, these desperate children, they'd needed him. And for the first time in 3 years, he'd let himself need something too. "I'll stay," he said quietly. "At least until you're well, until the girls are settled." Rachel smiled, and even in the darkness, it was like sunrise. "That's a start." Inside the house, Lily called out that Emma was asking for them. Rachel stood, gently tugging Ethan to his feet. Together they went inside, where Emma lay in the small bed she shared with her sister, her eyes already heavy with sleep. "Sing," Emma whispered to Lily, "like Papa used to." Lily's voice, young and clear, rose in a simple lullaby, something about stars and dreams and tomorrow's promise. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching, and felt something shift in his chest. Not healing, exactly. Not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. The next days brought a whirlwind of legal proceedings and revelations. Marshall Thornton and his team spent hours going through Thomas Miller's journal, cross-referencing it with bank records and land deeds. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Hale's corruption went back nearly a decade, touching almost every business transaction in Salvation Ridge and the surrounding territory. He'd bankrupted honest farmers, driven families from their homes, and accumulated a fortune built on theft and extortion. The 6 murders Thomas had documented turned out to be just the beginning. Evidence suggested at least a dozen deaths could be attributed directly or indirectly to Hale's schemes. The railroad fraud was the final piece. Hale had indeed bribed surveyors to report that the valley route was impossible, then spent 3 years systematically acquiring every piece of land along the actual planned route. When the railroad finally announced the true path, Hale would have controlled enough property to demand whatever price he wanted. He would have made millions, Thornton told Ethan as they reviewed the evidence. All of it stolen from people who trusted him. What happens now? We've got him cold on multiple counts of fraud, bribery, conspiracy to commit murder, and attempted murder of a federal officer. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison, assuming he survives the trial. Thornton paused. His accomplices are talking already. The sheriff, the bank manager, several others. They're all trying to make deals. Will you give them deals? Some of them, the ones who were coerced or had minor roles. But the core conspirators? Thornton's smile was grim. They'll face justice. The town began to change almost immediately. With Hale gone and his network of corruption exposed, people who'd been silent for years started talking. Stories emerged of threats, violence, and fear that had paralyzed the community. But there were also stories of resistance, of small acts of courage that had kept hope alive. The proprietor from the general store, his name was Henry Wilson, became an unlikely leader, organizing town meetings to discuss how to move forward. Pastor Matthews, recovering from his injuries, opened the church for anyone who needed shelter or support. Slowly, painfully, Salvation Ridge began to remember what it had been before fear took root. Ethan spent his days helping Rachel recover and repairing the ranch. The work was hard but satisfying in a way he hadn't felt in years. There was something healing about building instead of destroying, about creating instead of enforcing. The girls followed him everywhere. Lily peppered him with questions about everything from carpentry to law enforcement to what the ocean looked like. Emma didn't talk much, but she watched him with those solemn blue eyes and occasionally slipped her small hand into his when he least expected it. Rachel grew stronger each day, the medicine and rest finally allowing her body to heal. She watched Ethan with those storm-gray eyes, and sometimes he'd catch her smiling for no reason he could determine. "What?" he asked one afternoon, catching her watching him teach Lily how to mend fence. "Nothing. Just—" She paused. "Thomas used to do that. Show her how things worked. She was always his shadow." "I can stop if it bothers you." "No, don't stop." Rachel's smile was sad but genuine. "It's good for her. Good for both of them. They need—" She stopped, seemed to reconsider her words. "They need someone who won't leave." "I'm still leaving. Eventually." "Are you?" It wasn't a challenge, just a question. "Because it doesn't look like leaving from where I'm standing. It looks like staying." Ethan didn't have an answer for that. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Marshal Thornton returned with news. The territorial governor, embarrassed by the corruption that had flourished under his watch, had ordered a complete review of all land transactions in the county. Families who'd been illegally foreclosed on would get their property back. Debts fraudulently inflated would be corrected. It would take months, maybe years, but justice would be done. "There's something else," Thornton said, pulling Ethan aside. "The governor's impressed with what you did here. He's offering you a position, territorial deputy marshal, based wherever you choose. Good pay, full authority, pension." I told you I'm done with badges." "You also told me you didn't know what you were doing next." Thornton's eyes were kind but firm. "Look, son, I don't know what happened 3 years ago that made you give it up, but I know what I saw here. A man who still believes in justice, who's willing to stand up when it would be easier to walk away. That's rare. The territory needs men like you. The territory needs men who won't fail when it matters most. You didn't fail here. I got lucky here. Luck's part of it, always is. But luck doesn't comfort scared children or stand down 20 armed men. That was you." Thornton placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You get to choose who you are, Cross. You can keep running from whatever ghosts are chasing you, or you can accept that you're still the man who wears the badge, whether it's pinned to your chest or not." The offer stayed with Ethan, nagging at him as he continued working on the ranch. He'd been so certain for 3 years that the law had failed him, that his badge was a symbol of everything he'd lost. But maybe Thornton was right. Maybe the failure hadn't been in the badge itself, but in believing that wearing it made him invincible, that it could protect the people he loved from a world that didn't care about justice or fairness. 3 weeks after the confrontation, the first snow fell. Ethan stood in the Miller yard, watching it come down in fat, lazy flakes that caught the lamplight from the house. Behind him, he could hear Lily and Emma laughing at something Rachel had said. The sound was warm, familiar, like it had always been there. The front door opened and Rachel stepped out, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She'd gained weight, the hollows in her face filling out as health returned. She looked younger, lighter, like the weight of fear had finally lifted. "They want you to come tuck them in," she said. "Apparently that's your job now." "Is it?" "According to Emma, yes." Rachel moved to stand beside him. "She talked today, really talked. Told Lily a whole story about a horse she wants to have someday." "That's wonderful." "It is." Rachel was quiet for a moment. "The girls are getting attached to you, Ethan." "I know." "Is that fair, to let them care when you're planning to leave?" Ethan watched the snowfall. "Probably not." "Then why are you still here?" It was the question he'd been asking himself for weeks. The honest answer terrified him. "Because when I'm here, I don't feel broken," he said quietly. "Because when Emma takes my hand or Lily asks me questions or you smile at me over morning coffee, I remember what it felt like to be whole, and that scares me more than anything I faced with Hale." Rachel took his hand. "Why does it scare you?" "Because I don't know if I deserve it. Another chance." "Nobody deserves anything, Ethan. We just get what we get and try to make the best of it." She squeezed his hand. "You saved us. You stayed when anyone else would have run. You kept promises you had no obligation to keep. If that doesn't earn a second chance, I don't know what does." Before Ethan could respond, the door burst open and Lily appeared. "Mr. Cross, Emma won't go to sleep until you tell her a story." "What kind of story?" "A happy one. With horses and no bad people." Lily grabbed his free hand, tugging him toward the house. "Come on!" Ethan let himself be pulled inside, into the warmth and light, into the sound of Emma's giggle as he made up a ridiculous tale about a magical horse who could fly. He tucked both girls into bed, accepted their goodnight hugs, and found himself meaning it when he promised to be there in the morning. Rachel was waiting when he emerged from the children's room. She'd made coffee, strong and black, the way he liked it. They sat at the small table, comfortable in the silence. "I got a letter from my sister in California," Rachel said finally. "She heard about what happened, wants us to come stay with her, start over somewhere new." Ethan's chest tightened. "Are you going?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to run away from this place and everything that happened here, but another part—" She looked around the small, patched house. "Thomas and I built this. We dreamed here. The girls were born here. Running feels like letting Hale win, even though he's sitting in a jail cell." "What do the girls want?" "They want to stay. Lily said this is home. Emma just asked if you'd still visit if we left." Rachel's eyes met his. "Would you?" "I don't know." Ethan set down his coffee cup. "Rachel, I can't promise. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking if you can see a future here, with us." The question hung between them, enormous and terrifying. Ethan thought about the life he'd lost, the family he'd failed. But he also thought about Lily's determination, Emma's healing silence, Rachel's strength. About the way the girls had started calling him Mr. Cross in a tone that sounded almost like Papa. "I can see it," he admitted, "and that terrifies me." "Good," Rachel said and smiled. "Anything worth having should be a little terrifying." That night, lying on the small cot in what had been Thomas's workshop, Ethan stared at the ceiling and made a decision. Not about forever, that was too big, too impossible, but about tomorrow, and the day after that, and as many days as he could manage without running. In the morning, he'd start rebuilding the barn, maybe fix the porch steps, plant seeds for a spring garden. Small things, manageable things, steps toward a future he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. It wasn't redemption, not yet. But it was a beginning, and sometimes he was learning that was enough. The trial of Victor Hale began on a cold morning in early December, nearly 6 weeks after his arrest. The territorial courthouse in Helena was packed with spectators, people who'd traveled from Salvation Ridge and surrounding towns, newspaper reporters from as far away as San Francisco, and curious onlookers drawn by the sensational nature of the charges. Ethan sat in the front row, Rachel beside him. The girls had stayed with Henry Wilson and his wife, a kind woman who'd taken to mothering half the children in town since the truth about Hale had emerged. Rachel had wanted to bring them, to let them see justice done for their father, but Ethan had convinced her otherwise. Some things children didn't need to witness. Hale was brought in wearing chains, his expensive suit replaced by prison clothes, his face gaunt from weeks of confinement. The shoulder wound had healed poorly, leaving him with limited mobility in his right arm. He looked diminished, smaller somehow, without the trappings of power that had made him seem invincible. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and Ethan saw hatred there, pure and venomous. Hale might be broken, but he wasn't defeated, not in his own mind. The prosecutor was a sharp-eyed man named Daniel Garrett, who'd made a career of taking down corrupt officials and businessmen. He'd spent weeks preparing the case, interviewing witnesses, reviewing Thomas Miller's journal, building an argument so airtight that even Hale's expensive lawyers couldn't find cracks. The evidence will show, Garrett said in his opening statement, that the defendant engaged in a systematic campaign of fraud, extortion, and murder spanning nearly a decade. That he manipulated land records, bribed public officials, and arranged the deaths of at least 6 men who threatened to expose his schemes. That he built an empire of fear through violence and intimidation, crushing anyone who dared to stand against him. Hale's lawyer, a pompous man from Chicago who clearly believed his client's money could buy innocence, tried to paint a different picture. Hale was a businessman, nothing more. A man who'd taken risks, made hard decisions, but never crossed the line into criminality. The deaths were accidents, the foreclosures legitimate, the accusations nothing more than jealousy from those who lacked Hale's vision and ambition. "My client is guilty only of success," the lawyer proclaimed, "in a frontier territory where success breeds envy, where small minds cannot comprehend the machinations of commerce, where tragedy is too often blamed on malice rather than misfortune." It was a pretty speech. It was also nonsense, and the jury knew it. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Garrett called witness after witness, each one adding another piece to the puzzle. The railroad surveyor who admitted accepting bribes to falsify his report. The former bank clerk who testified about ledgers kept off the books. The widow whose husband had died in a convenient accident after refusing to sell his land. Rachel testified on the 3rd day. Ethan watched her walk to the stand, straight back despite her nerves, and felt a surge of pride. She was so much stronger than she'd been 2 months ago, the sickness that had nearly killed her replaced by a quiet determination. "Mrs. Miller," Garrett said gently, "please tell the court about your husband's final days." Rachel's voice was steady as she described Thomas's growing concern about irregularities at the bank, his decision to investigate, his discovery of the fraud. She told them about the journal he'd kept, the evidence he'd gathered, his plan to take it to the federal marshals. "And what happened the night before he planned to leave for Helena?" Garrett asked. "He died." Rachel's hands gripped the rail of the witness box. "They said his horse threw him, that he hit his head, but Thomas was an expert rider. He'd grown up on a ranch, could handle any horse, and his saddle—" Her voice caught. "His saddle had been cut. The girth strap was nearly severed. I found it later, hidden in the barn." Hale's lawyer objected, claiming the evidence was hearsay, but the judge overruled him. The saddle had been recovered and examined by experts who confirmed the cut was deliberate, not wear and tear. "Did the defendant ever threaten your husband?" Garrett continued. "Not directly. But Thomas told me that Mr. Hale had warned him about asking too many questions, said accidents happened to people who didn't mind their own business." Rachel looked directly at Hale. 3 days later, my husband was dead. When Ethan took the stand the following day, he carried Thomas Miller's journal. Garrett had him authenticate it, explain how he'd found it, describe what it contained. Then Ethan read selected passages aloud, damning entries that detailed payoffs, threats, and deaths in Thomas's precise handwriting. "Mr. Cross," Garrett said, "in your professional opinion as a former federal deputy marshal, what do these entries represent?" "Evidence of systematic criminal activity, fraud, bribery, conspiracy to commit murder, and murder itself." Hale's lawyer cross-examined him aggressively, trying to discredit his testimony by focusing on his resignation from the Marshal Service, his years of drifting, his lack of official standing when he intervened in Salvation Ridge. "You're not a lawman anymore, are you, Mr. Cross?" "No. You resigned 3 years ago under circumstances you refused to discuss. For all we know, you were forced out. For all we know, you have a history of fabricating evidence or manipulating witnesses." Ethan kept his voice level. "I resigned because my family was killed while I was away on duty. I blamed myself. I couldn't continue in a role that had cost me everything I loved." The lawyer pressed harder. "And yet you expect this court to believe that you, a broken-down drifter with no authority and no credibility, somehow uncovered a vast conspiracy that had eluded legitimate law enforcement for years?" "I didn't uncover it. Thomas Miller did. I just made sure his work didn't die with him." "How convenient that you happened to arrive in Salvation Ridge at precisely the right moment. How convenient that a journal no one had seen for weeks suddenly appeared when you needed evidence. How do we know you didn't create that journal yourself?" Before Ethan could answer, Marshal Thornton stood up from his seat in the gallery. "May I address the court, Your Honor?" The judge, a stern woman in her 50s who'd been appointed by the territorial governor, nodded. "Marshal Thornton, you may approach." Thornton walked to the front of the courtroom with the deliberate pace of a man who'd testified hundreds of times. "Your Honor, I've known Ethan Cross for 15 years. He served under my command as a deputy marshal and was one of the finest lawmen I ever worked with. His resignation was exactly as he described, a personal tragedy that he handled with more grace than most men could manage. As for the journal, our forensic analysis confirmed that it was written over a period of months by the same hand, that the ink and paper match materials available in Salvation Ridge, and that the information contained within has been independently verified by multiple sources. If the defense wants to suggest that Mr. Cross somehow forged months of detailed financial records and personal observations in the space of a few days, I'd be fascinated to hear how." The lawyer sat down, his momentum broken. The trial continued for 2 more weeks. Expert witnesses testified about the forged documents, the manipulated land records, the bribed officials. Hale's former accomplices, hoping for reduced sentences, turned on their boss with detailed accounts of his orders and methods. The man who'd shot Thomas Miller's horse testified that Hale had paid him $500 to make it look like an accident. Through it all, Hale sat silent, his face a mask of contempt. Only once did he react, when Pastor Matthews took the stand and described the beatings and threats, the way Hale had used religion as another tool of control. Hale had actually smiled then, a cold expression that suggested he regretted nothing. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Thomas Miller, how do you find? Guilty. On the charge of fraud in the matter of land acquisitions, guilty. On the charge of bribery of public officials, guilty. 15 charges in total. Guilty on every count. The courtroom erupted in cheers and tears. Rachel sobbed into Ethan's shoulder, relief and grief mixing together in a flood of emotion. Around them, people from Salvation Ridge embraced, some laughing, some crying, all of them feeling the weight of fear finally lifting. Hale's face remained impassive as the verdict was read, but his hands shook as the bailiffs led him away. At the door he turned and looked back at the courtroom, his eyes finding Ethan's one last time. "This isn't over," he mouthed silently. But it was. 3 days later, the judge sentenced Victor Hale to life in prison without possibility of parole. His assets were seized and would be used to compensate his victims. His accomplices received sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years, depending on their level of involvement. The territorial governor, embarrassed by the extent of corruption that had flourished under his watch, announced a special commission to review land transactions throughout the territory. He also appointed Marshal Thornton to head a new anti-corruption task force. "We will root out this cancer wherever it exists," the governor proclaimed at a press conference. "Montana Territory will be known for justice, not for the kind of lawlessness that allowed men like Victor Hale to prosper." It was a pretty speech, and Ethan hoped it was more than just words. The journey back to Salvation Ridge took 2 days through early winter weather. Ethan and Rachel traveled in a borrowed wagon, wrapped in blankets against the cold, talking about everything and nothing. About Thomas and the life Rachel had lost. About Sarah and Michael and the guilt Ethan still carried. About the future and whether either of them had the courage to reach for it. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," Rachel admitted as they made camp the first night. "After Thomas died, after Hale made it clear we were on our own, I thought the fear would never end, that we'd spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, waiting for the next threat. You don't have to anymore." "No. Thanks to you." She looked at him across the fire. "You gave us our lives back, Ethan. You gave us hope. How do I ever repay that?" "You don't need to repay it." "Then what do I need to do?" Ethan poked at the fire, watching sparks rise into the darkness. "Just keep living. Keep being the mother those girls need. Keep rebuilding what Hale tried to destroy. That's enough." "Is it enough for you?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "You've spent 2 months helping us, protecting us, making sure we survived. But what about what you need? When do you start rebuilding your own life?" Ethan didn't have an answer. The truth was, he'd been so focused on saving the Miller family that he hadn't thought much about what came after. The offer from the territorial governor still stood. A badge, authority, a chance to do the work he'd once believed in. But the idea of pinning metal to his chest again, of taking responsibility for protecting people he might fail, I don't know if I can be that man again, he said quietly. The one who believed a badge meant something. Maybe you're not supposed to be that man again. Maybe you're supposed to be someone new. Rachel stood, moved to sit beside him. The Ethan who arrived in Salvation Ridge 2 months ago was running from his past, convinced he'd failed everyone who mattered. But the Ethan sitting here now, he saved a family, brought down a corrupt empire, gave a whole town the courage to take back their freedom. That's not failure. I got lucky. You got brave. There's a difference. She took his hand. You told me once that you couldn't promise anything, that you were too broken. But Ethan, we're all broken, every single one of us. The question isn't whether we have cracks, it's whether we let the light shine through them or keep everything locked in darkness. Before Ethan could respond, snow began to fall, thick and soft, muffling sound and wrapping the world in white silence. They sat together by the fire, watching it accumulate, two broken people trying to figure out how to be whole. The welcome they received upon returning to Salvation Ridge was overwhelming. It seemed like the entire town had turned out to greet them, despite the cold and the late hour. Henry Wilson led the crowd, his face split in a huge grin. "They found him guilty on all counts," someone shouted, and the crowd erupted in cheers. Lily and Emma broke free from Mrs. Wilson's grasp and ran to their mother, nearly knocking her over with the force of their hugs. Emma was crying, her small face pressed against Rachel's coat. Lily was trying to be brave, but tears streamed down her cheeks too. "We heard," Lily managed. "They said Mr. Hale is going to prison forever. Is it true? Is it really over?" "It's really over," Rachel confirmed, holding both girls tight. Emma pulled away and looked around, her eyes searching. When she found Ethan climbing down from the wagon, her face transformed. She ran to him and threw her arms around his waist, holding on like she'd never let go. "You came back," she whispered. "You promised you'd come back." Ethan knelt down so he was at her eye level. "I always keep my promises to you." "Always?" "Always." Emma studied his face with those solemn blue eyes, looking for something. Whatever she found must have satisfied her because she smiled, a real smile, bright and genuine, and hugged him again. Over her head, Ethan saw Rachel watching, her expression soft. Lily stood beside her mother, grinning like she knew secrets the adults hadn't figured out yet. The town threw an impromptu celebration that night. Someone produced a fiddle, someone else brought food, and before long the church hall was filled with music and laughter and the kind of joy that comes from shared survival. People who'd been silent under Hale's rule found their voices again. Stories were told, tears were shed, and slowly, carefully, a community began to remember how to be whole. Ethan found himself pulled into conversation after conversation. People thanked him, asked him questions, wanted to shake his hand or buy him drinks. It was overwhelming and uncomfortable, and he eventually escaped to the church steps for some air. Pastor Matthews found him there, nursing a cup of something that claimed to be coffee but tasted more like creek water. "Quite a celebration," the pastor observed, settling onto the step beside him. "Quite a mess is more like it. Someone's going to break something before the night's over." Matthews laughed. "Probably. But after 2 months of fear and uncertainty, people need to let loose a little, need to remember what it feels like to celebrate." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the music and laughter spilling from the hall. Then Matthews said, "What are your plans now, Ethan? Are you staying?" "I don't know." "That's an honest answer, at least." Matthews studied him. "You know the girls are attached to you, don't you? And Rachel, well, she hasn't smiled like that since Thomas died." "I know." "So what's holding you back?" Ethan took a long drink of the terrible coffee. "Fear, mostly. Fear that I'll fail them the way I failed my family. Fear that the moment I commit to staying, something will happen to take it all away again. Fear that I don't deserve this second chance." "None of us deserve our second chances," Matthews said quietly. "That's what makes them grace. We just have to be brave enough to accept them." "How do you do that? Accept something you don't deserve?" By recognizing that deserve has nothing to do with it. We get what we get, and we choose what to do with it. Matthew stood, brushed snow from his pants. Those girls asked you to be their daddy for one day. You've given them 2 months and counting. The question is whether you're brave enough to give them the rest of your life. He walked back inside, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts and the falling snow. The weeks that followed the trial brought unexpected changes. With Hale's criminal empire dismantled, the Territorial Commission began the painstaking work of untangling his fraudulent land deals. Families who'd been illegally foreclosed on got their property back. Debts that had been fraudulently inflated were corrected or forgiven entirely. The town's economy, which had been strangled by Hale's monopolistic control, began to breathe again. New businesses opened. The general store got a competitor. Someone started a newspaper to make sure corruption could never thrive in darkness again. People who'd left Salvation Ridge under Hale's pressure began trickling back, drawn by news that the town was healing. Ethan threw himself into work at the Miller Ranch. The barn needed complete rebuilding, the fences were a disaster, and the house itself required extensive repairs. He worked from dawn until dark most days, grateful for the physical exhaustion that kept his mind too busy for doubt. Lily shadowed him constantly, asking questions and learning everything he could teach her. She had her father's mind for detail and her mother's determination, a combination that would serve her well. Emma was quieter, but equally present, often sitting nearby with her doll while Ethan worked, her presence a small anchor that kept him grounded. Rachel recovered more each day, the pneumonia finally releasing its grip. She took over teaching the girls again, setting up a small classroom in the kitchen where she instructed not only Lily and Emma, but several other children whose parents were too busy rebuilding their own lives to manage education. "We need a real school," she told Ethan one evening. "A building, proper desks, books. The children deserve better than makeshift lessons around my kitchen table. The town's still recovering. Money's tight." "I know, but it's important." Rachel's eyes took on a determined glint he'd learned to recognize. Thomas always said education was the key to breaking cycles of poverty and control. That's how men like Hale maintain power, by keeping people ignorant and dependent. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we have a town full of people who owe their freedom to someone willing to stand up to corruption. I'm thinking they might be willing to contribute labor and materials to build something that ensures the next generation knows the value of knowledge and independence." She was right. When Rachel proposed the idea at a town meeting the following week, the response was immediate and enthusiastic. Men volunteered labor. The sawmill offered lumber at cost. Women organized fundraising events. Within days, plans were drawn for a schoolhouse to be built on land the town would purchase collectively. "Your mother's quite something," Ethan told Lily as they worked on fence repair one afternoon. "She is," Lily agreed. "Papa used to say she could move mountains if she put her mind to it." The girl was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you miss him? Papa, I mean?" The question caught Ethan off guard. "I never met your father." "I know, but do you miss him anyway? Like, miss the space where he should be?" It was a surprisingly perceptive question from a 9-year-old. Ethan set down his hammer, considering his answer carefully. "I think about him," he said finally. "About the man he must have been to raise daughters as brave as you and your sister. About the husband he was to make your mother smile the way she does when she talks about him. About the kind of courage it took to stand up to Hale, knowing it might cost him everything." He paused. "So yes, I suppose I do miss him. I miss the world where he's still alive, still here with all of you." "But then you wouldn't be here." "No, I wouldn't." Lily studied him with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. "I miss Papa every day. But I'm glad you're here too. Does that make me a bad daughter?" "Oh, sweetheart, no." Ethan pulled her into a hug, feeling her small body shake with tears she'd been holding back. "It makes you human. You can miss your father and be grateful for help at the same time. Those feelings don't cancel each other out. Mama says Papa would have liked you, that you're the kind of man he hoped would help us if something happened to him. Your mother's very kind." "She's not being kind. She's being honest." Lily pulled back, wiping her eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you going to marry Mama and be our real daddy? Or are you going to leave like you keep saying you will?" The blunt question left Ethan speechless. Before he could formulate an answer, Lily continued. Because Emma and me, we talk about it at night. We know you're scared because your family died and you think it's your fault. We know you think you'll fail us too. But Mr. Cross, you've already been our daddy for 2 months. You tuck us in and tell us stories and teach us things and make Mama smile again. You're already ours. The only question is whether you're brave enough to admit it. 9 years old, and she'd cut straight through every excuse and rationalization to the truth he'd been avoiding. Ethan looked at this fierce, brilliant girl and saw not a child but a person who'd survived more than most adults ever would. I am scared, he admitted. Terrified, actually. That's okay. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Lily picked up the hammer he'd set down. Papa told me that, right before he went to Mr. Hale with his evidence. They worked in silence for a while, but the conversation stayed with Ethan. That night, lying on his cot in the workshop, he stared at the ceiling and finally let himself imagine it. A future here. A life with Rachel and the girls. Maybe more children. Growing old in this place, watching Lily and Emma become women. Being there for all the moments his own son would never have. The thought terrified him. It also filled him with a longing so intense it was almost painful. The decision crystallized one morning in late December. Ethan was working on the barn roof when he heard shouting from the house. He scrambled down the ladder, heart pounding, expecting trouble. Instead, he found Emma dancing in the yard, her face lit with pure joy. Rachel stood on the porch, holding a letter, tears streaming down her face. Lily was laughing and crying at the same time. What happened? Ethan demanded. Is everything all right? Better than all right, Rachel managed. The commission, they reviewed Thomas's investments, the money he'd saved before Hale manipulated the accounts. It was supposed to go to the girls' education, but Hale claimed it as part of the debt. She held up the letter. They're returning it, all of it, with interest. How much? Rachel named a sum that made Ethan's eyebrows rise. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to secure the ranch, enough to ensure the girls' future, enough to build the life Thomas had wanted for his family. Emma ran to Ethan and grabbed his hands. We're going to be okay, really okay. Mama says we can fix everything and maybe even get horses and I can learn to ride and… She stopped, her joy suddenly uncertain. You'll still be here, right? To teach me to ride? And there it was. The question that had been hanging over everything for 2 months. The moment where Ethan had to choose between the safety of running and the risk of staying. He looked at Emma's hopeful face, at Lily watching him with knowing eyes, at Rachel on the porch, trying not to let her own hope show too clearly. He thought about his wife and son, about the life he'd lost and the guilt he'd carried. But he also thought about what Pastor Matthews had said about grace, about second chances not being about deserving, but about choosing. And he thought about what Lily had said, that he was already theirs, that the only question was whether he was brave enough to admit it. Yes, he said, and the word felt like a door opening. I'll be here. Emma's shriek of joy probably scared birds 3 counties over. Lily whooped and ran to join her sister in an impromptu dance. And Rachel's smile was like sunrise, warm and bright and full of promise. That night, after the girls were in bed, Ethan and Rachel sat on the porch despite the cold. The stars were brilliant overhead, sharp and clear in the winter air. Did you mean it? Rachel asked quietly. About staying? I meant it. Why? What changed? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, organizing thoughts he'd barely admitted to himself. Nothing changed. That's what I finally realized. I've been here for 2 months, and every day I told myself it was temporary, that I was just helping until you were back on your feet. But the truth is, I stopped being temporary the day Emma asked me to be their daddy. I just didn't have the courage to admit it until now. And now you do? Now I do. Or at least, I'm going to try. He turned to face her. I can't promise I won't fail sometimes. Can't promise I won't wake up terrified that I'll lose you all the way I lost them. But I can promise I'll try. Every day I'll try to be the man those girls think I am. Rachel took his hand. That's all any of us can do. Try. And when we fail, get up and try again. They sat in silence, hands linked, watching the stars. Then Rachel said, "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you." "What?" "I'm falling in love with you." The words came out soft but certain. "Maybe I have been for weeks. I tried not to. Tried to tell myself it was too soon, that I was confusing gratitude with something deeper. But it's not gratitude. It's you. The way you are with the girls. The way you fixed our house without being asked. The way you stood up to Hale even though you had no obligation to protect us." She paused. "I know you're not ready to hear that. I know you're still carrying your wife in your heart, and that's okay. I just needed you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'm here." Ethan's throat tightened. "Rachel, You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know." But Ethan found he did need to say something, needed to speak the truth he'd been avoiding because it felt like a betrayal of everything he'd lost. "Sarah was my whole world," he said quietly. "When she died, I thought I died too. That whatever was left walking around in my body wasn't really alive, just going through motions until I could join her." He looked at Rachel, really looked at her. "But these past 2 months with you and the girls, I've felt alive again. Not the same as before. Different, but real. And it terrifies me because it feels like I'm betraying her memory by moving forward. You're not betraying anyone by choosing to live." "I know that in my head. My heart's still catching up." Ethan squeezed her hand. "I can't say I'm falling in love with you. Not yet. The words feel too big, too permanent. But I can say that when I think about the future now, I see you in it. See the girls, see a life here that looks nothing like what I had before, but maybe, possibly, could be something worth building." "That's enough," Rachel said and smiled. "That's more than enough." The territorial governor's offer came 3 days before Christmas, delivered by Marshal Thornton himself. Ethan was in the barn when the marshal arrived, and something in Thornton's expression told him this wasn't a social call. "The governor wants you on his anti-corruption task force," Thornton said without preamble. "Full deputy marshal status, good pay, based wherever you want in the territory. You'd report directly to me, work on cases involving official corruption, land fraud, that sort of thing. After what you did here, you're exactly the kind of man we need." It was everything Ethan had once wanted: purpose, authority, a chance to make a real difference. But as he looked around the barn, he'd been rebuilding, thought about the girls waiting for him to come teach them their letters, remembered Rachel's smile that morning over coffee. He realized something fundamental had shifted. "I'm honored," he said carefully. "Truly, but I need to think about it." Thornton's expression suggested he'd expected this. "The girls. The girls. Rachel, this place." Ethan gestured around. 2 months ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Would have jumped at the chance to pin on a badge again, to prove I was still the man I'd been before everything fell apart. But now you found something worth staying for. Maybe. I don't know yet. I just know I'm not ready to leave." Thornton nodded slowly. "The offer stands. A month, 6 months, a year from now. If you change your mind, the job's yours. But Ethan, don't wait too long. The territory needs good men, and there aren't many left who understand what you do about justice and mercy." After Thornton left, Ethan sat in the barn for a long time, turning the offer over in his mind. It would mean travel, danger, time away from home. It would mean returning to a life he'd sworn he was done with. But it would also mean using his skills for something that mattered, preventing other families from suffering what the Millers had endured. He was still thinking about it when Lily found him an hour later. "Mama says dinner's ready. She made stew, the good kind with actual meat." Lily paused. "Are you okay? You look sad." "Just thinking." "About the marshal's offer? We heard him talking to you." "You shouldn't eavesdrop." "We weren't eavesdropping. We were standing in the yard, and voices carry." Lily sat down beside him on a hay bale. "Are you going to take it, the badge?" "I don't know. Do you want to?" It was a simple question, but the answer was complicated. Part of me does. Part of me misses the work. Misses feeling like I'm making a difference in a way that matters. And the other part? The other part doesn't want to leave you and Emma and your mother. Doesn't want to go back to a life where I'm always chasing danger, always one step away from the kind of tragedy that took everything from me before. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Papa used to say that being brave means doing scary things for good reasons. He was scared when he went after Mr. Hale, but he did it anyway because it was right. Maybe this is like that. Maybe you need to figure out what the good reason is. And if I can't find one, then maybe that's your answer. She stood, brushed hay from her dress. Come eat dinner. Emma's going to tell you about the picture she drew at school. It's terrible, but you have to pretend it's good. Ethan laughed despite himself and followed her inside, the question still unanswered but somehow less urgent. Christmas came with a fresh blanket of snow and a warmth inside the Miller house that had nothing to do with the fire. Rachel had somehow managed to find small gifts for everyone despite their limited resources. Ethan gave the girls books he'd ordered from Helena, adventure stories about brave girls doing impossible things. They gave him a scarf they'd knitted themselves, crooked and uneven and absolutely perfect. On Christmas Eve, after the girls were asleep, Ethan and Rachel sat by the fire drinking the last of the terrible coffee from the general store and talking about everything and nothing. I've made a decision, Ethan said finally, about the marshal's offer. Rachel set down her cup, her expression carefully neutral. And? I'm turning it down. For now, at least. He looked at her. Maybe someday I'll be ready to pin on a badge again. Maybe there'll come a time when the girls are older, when you're stronger, when this place is truly secure. But right now, what you need is someone who's here. Actually here, not chasing corruption across the territory and coming home to a family that barely knows him. You're sure? I'm sure that 3 months ago I was a broken man running from ghosts. Now I'm someone who tucks little girls into bed and fixes fences and drinks terrible coffee with a woman who makes me believe in second chances. He reached for her hand. I don't know what the future holds. Can't promise I'll never leave or that I'll always make the right choices. But I can promise that right now, in this moment, there's nowhere else I'd rather be. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. That's enough. For now, it's enough. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in quiet white. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, and two people who'd each lost everything began to believe they might, possibly, have found something worth keeping. It wasn't healing, not yet, not completely, but it was a beginning, and sometimes that was enough. The new year arrived with a thaw that turned the roads to mud and filled the air with the promise of spring still months away. Ethan stood in the yard of the Miller Ranch, surveying the work they'd accomplished over the winter. The barn stood solid and square, its new roof gleaming in the weak January sun. The fences ran straight and true. The house had been patched and reinforced until it no longer looked like it might collapse at the first strong wind. It was progress, real and tangible, and it filled him with a satisfaction he hadn't felt in years. It looks good, Rachel said, coming to stand beside him. She'd bundled herself in one of Thomas's old coats, still too big for her frame despite the weight she'd regained. Thomas would be proud of what you've done here. We've done, Ethan corrected. You and the girls worked just as hard as I did. Maybe, but you're the one who knew how to do it right. She smiled up at him, and something in her expression made his chest tighten. I have something to ask you, and I need you to be honest with me. All right. Are you happy here? Really happy. Not just going through the motions because you made a promise? The question surprised him. Ethan thought about it carefully, examining his days for the truth beneath the routine. He thought about waking to the smell of Rachel's coffee, teaching Lily how to measure lumber, listening to Emma's increasingly confident voice as she read aloud from her books. He thought about the ache in his muscles at day's end, the satisfaction of problems solved and work completed, the warmth of the kitchen in the evening when they all gathered for dinner. Yes, he said, and realized it was true. I'm happy. Not the same way I was before. That life is gone, and I've accepted it. But this is its own kind of good. Rachel's smile widened. Good. Because I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? The kind where you stop sleeping in Thomas's workshop and move into the house properly. The kind where we stop pretending you're just helping out temporarily and acknowledge that you're part of this family. She paused, her cheeks flushing. The kind where maybe, eventually, we stop dancing around what we both know is happening between us and actually talk about it. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. Rachel, I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow, she said quickly. I know you're not ready for that. I'm not sure I am either, but I am asking you to stop holding yourself at arm's length from the life that's right in front of you. The girls already call you Papa when they think we can't hear them. I already think of you as my partner, not just hired help. We're already a family in every way that matters except the official ones. I just want us to be honest about it. Before Ethan could respond, Lily's voice called from the house. Mama, Mister, Cross, come quick! They ran inside to find Emma standing in the kitchen, her face pale, clutching a letter. Lily hovered beside her, looking worried. What is it? Rachel asked. Emma, sweetheart, what's wrong? Emma held out the letter with shaking hands. It was addressed to Rachel, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. Rachel opened it, her eyes scanning the contents, and Ethan watched her face go through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, and finally something that looked like disbelief mixed with joy. It's from the railroad, she said faintly. The Northern Pacific. They've confirmed they're coming through the valley, and they want to buy our eastern property for the route. She looked up, her eyes wide. They're offering 3 times what the land is worth for market value. They say it's compensation for what we endured during the fraud investigation. Ethan took the letter, read it himself to make sure it was real. The sum at the bottom made him whistle low. Combined with what the commission had already returned to them, it meant the Miller family would be more than secure. It meant comfort, education for the girls, a future free from the grinding poverty that had nearly destroyed them. We're rich, Lily breathed. We're actually rich. Not rich, Rachel corrected, but she was laughing through tears. But comfortable. Very comfortable. We can fix everything properly now, maybe buy more land, hire help for the ranch. The girls can go to college if they want. We can... She stopped, overwhelmed. Emma walked quietly to Ethan and took his hand. Does this mean you don't have to stay anymore? Because we can afford to hire people? The question hung in the air, fragile and loaded with fear. Ethan knelt down so he was eye level with her. Emma, I'm not here because you needed help you couldn't afford. I'm here because I want to be here. This is my home now. You're my family now. He glanced at Rachel, saw her eyes shining with tears, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and absolutely right. In fact, I was hoping to talk to your mother about making that official. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Lily gasped. Emma's eyes went wide. Official how? Lily demanded. Ethan stood, took Rachel's hands in his. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure everyone could hear it, but the words needed to be said. Rachel Miller, I didn't come to Salvation Ridge looking for anything except a place to forget my pain. But I found something I never expected, a reason to stop running. A reason to believe I could be more than my failures. He paused, gathering courage. I know it's only been a few months. I know you're still mourning Thomas, and I'm still carrying Sarah and Michael in my heart. But I also know that what we have here is real. These girls have become my daughters in every way that matters. And you've become the person I think about first when I wake up and last before I sleep. You've become my hope for the future. Ethan, Rachel whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm not asking you to marry me today. I know we need time, but I am asking permission to court you properly, to build toward a future where we're not just surviving together but actually living, where I'm not just the hired hand but your husband, where Lily and Emma aren't just children I'm helping but my daughters, a future where we're a family not just by circumstance but by choice. For a long moment, Rachel just stared at him, tears falling unchecked. Then she laughed, a sound of pure joy, and threw her arms around his neck. Yes, she said. Yes to all of it, to courting and future and family and everything you're offering. Yes. Lily and Emma erupted in cheers, dancing around the kitchen and chanting something that sounded like, Papa's staying! Papa's staying! Ethan held Rachel close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the rightness of this moment in his bones. They'd found each other in the worst of circumstances, two broken people and two traumatized children. But somehow, impossibly, they'd built something beautiful from the wreckage. The months that followed were filled with the kind of ordinary happiness that Ethan had forgotten existed. He and Rachel courted in the old-fashioned way, supervised walks, Sunday dinners with the girls present, stolen moments of conversation by the fire after the children were asleep. They talked about everything: their lost spouses, their fears for the future, their hopes for the girls, their growing feelings for each other. "I feel guilty sometimes," Rachel admitted one evening in early March. They sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "Like I'm betraying Thomas by moving forward so quickly. It's been almost 6 months since he died." "I know, but we were together for 12 years. Sometimes it feels wrong that I can already imagine a future without him, a future with you." Ethan understood. He still wore his wedding ring on a chain around his neck, couldn't quite bring himself to take it off entirely. "Sarah would want me to be happy," he said quietly. "I know that intellectually. She loved me enough that she'd hate the idea of me spending the rest of my life alone and miserable, but knowing it and feeling it are different things." Thomas used to say that love wasn't a finite resource, that loving one person didn't mean you couldn't love another. Rachel leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think he'd like you. I think he'd be grateful you were here to protect his family when he couldn't." "I'd like to think so." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day fade into twilight. Then Rachel said, "The girls asked me when we're getting married. I told them we haven't decided yet." "What did you tell them you wanted?" "I told them the truth, that I'd marry you tomorrow if I thought you were ready, but I also told them that some things are worth waiting for." She looked up at him. "So I'm waiting, however long it takes." Ethan kissed her forehead gently. "It won't be much longer. I'm almost there." The breakthrough came in April, on what would have been Michael's 8th birthday. Ethan woke with the familiar ache in his chest, the weight of grief that made breathing difficult. He'd dreaded this day for weeks, knowing it would bring back all the memories he'd been carefully managing. Rachel found him sitting by the creek that ran through their property, staring at the water without seeing it. "Bad day?" she asked softly, settling beside him. "Michael's birthday. He would have been 8 today." Ethan's voice was rough. "Sarah always made it special. Cake, presents, whatever he wanted for dinner. He loved birthdays." "Tell me about him." So Ethan did. He talked about his son's infectious laugh, his curiosity about everything, the way he'd follow Ethan around asking endless questions about law enforcement and justice and how the world worked. He talked about Sarah too, her strength, her kindness, the way she'd believed in him even when he doubted himself. And as he talked, something shifted. The memories stopped being only painful and became something else too, a celebration of lives lived, of love shared, of the gift they'd been even though they were gone too soon. "They were lucky to have you," Rachel said when he finished. "And you were lucky to have them. That doesn't end just because they're gone." "I know, I just feel like I'm betraying them by being happy again." "You're not betraying anyone by choosing to live." Rachel took his hand. "Ethan, your wife and son are part of who you are. The love you had for them shaped the man sitting beside me right now. The man who stopped for 2 desperate girls on a frozen road, who stood up to corruption when it would have been easier to walk away, who learned to love again despite being terrified of losing everything. Sarah and Michael made you capable of that love. Honoring their memory doesn't mean staying frozen in grief. It means living fully, loving completely, and being the man they believed you were." Ethan looked at her, this woman who'd lost everything just as he had, who understood grief and fear and the terrifying possibility of hope. And he realized something fundamental. He'd been waiting for permission to move forward, for some sign that it was okay to let go of his guilt and embrace the future. But the only permission he needed was his own. "Marry me," he said. Rachel blinked. "What?" "Marry me. Not someday, not eventually. Soon, as soon as we can arrange it." Ethan turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. "I love you, Rachel. I love your strength and your courage and the way you make me believe in second chances. I love your daughters as if they were my own blood. I want to wake up next to you every morning and build a life that honors both the people we lost and the people we're becoming. So marry me, please." Rachel's smile was radiant. Yes, absolutely yes. They told the girls that evening. Lily whooped and tackled Ethan in a hug that nearly knocked him over. Emma climbed into his lap and whispered, "Does this mean I can call you Papa out loud now?" "It means you have to call me Papa," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, "because that's what I'm going to be. Your Papa, official and permanent." Emma's smile could have lit the whole valley. They married in May, on a day when spring had finally convinced Montana winter to loosen its grip. The ceremony took place in the church, with Pastor Matthews officiating and what seemed like the entire town of Salvation Ridge in attendance. Rachel wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair. Ethan wore his best shirt and the closest thing to a nervous smile anyone had seen on his face. Lily and Emma stood beside them, their roles in the ceremony carefully defined by Rachel as the most important witnesses to the promises being made. When Ethan and Rachel exchanged vows, both girls cried happy tears. "I promise to love you," Ethan said, his voice carrying through the small church. "Not as a replacement for what I lost, but as something new and precious in its own right. I promise to be a father to your daughters, to honor Thomas's memory by protecting the family he loved. I promise to stand beside you in joy and sorrow, in triumph and trial, for as long as we both live." Rachel's vows were equally simple and profound. "I promise to love you not as a shadow of the past, but as the man you are today. I promise to honor your grief while building our joy. I promise to stand beside you, to trust you with my heart and my children, to build a future that honors where we've been while embracing where we're going." When they kissed, sealing the promises, the church erupted in applause and cheers. Lily and Emma rushed forward, wrapping their arms around both of them in a group embrace that perfectly captured what they'd become. A family forged not by blood or convenience, but by choice and love and the courage to try again. The reception that followed was simple but joyful. Henry Wilson had donated food from the general store. Someone had made a cake that leaned slightly to one side but tasted wonderful. The fiddle player from the previous celebrations provided music, and people danced and laughed and celebrated not just a wedding, but everything it represented: the triumph of hope over fear, the possibility of healing after loss, the power of community to overcome corruption. Marshal Thornton attended, bringing a gift from the territorial governor, a formal pardon for any past debts the Miller family might have owed, along with a commendation for their role in exposing Hale's corruption. "The governor wanted you to know that Montana Territory remembers what you did," Thornton told them, "and that you'll always have friends in Helena if you need them." As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Ethan found himself standing outside the church with his new family. Rachel leaned against his side, her hand in his. Lily and Emma sat on the church steps, tired and happy, their best dresses dirty from dancing. "Happy?" Rachel asked quietly. Ethan thought about the question. 3 months ago, he would have said happiness was impossible, that the best he could hope for was the absence of acute pain. But looking at the girls, at the woman beside him, at the town that had become his home, he realized something had fundamentally changed. "Yes," he said, and meant it completely. "I'm happy." The summer brought new challenges and new joys. The ranch thrived under their combined efforts. They bought 3 horses with the railroad money, 1 each for the girls and a sturdy mare for Rachel. Ethan taught Lily to ride with the same patience and care Thomas would have shown, and Emma's face when she first cantered across the field was pure magic. They hired a hand named Jacob, a young man from Silver Falls, who'd lost his own family in a fire and understood what it meant to build something new from tragedy. He and Ethan worked together to expand the ranch's operations, building a future that could support not just the immediate family, but eventually provide employment for others. The schoolhouse Rachel had championed was completed in June, a beautiful building with real desks and a small library funded by donations from across the territory. Rachel became its first teacher, her classroom filled with children eager to learn from a woman who'd proven that knowledge and courage could overcome even the worst corruption. Lily flourished under her mother's instruction, showing an aptitude for mathematics that suggested she might someday manage the ranch's business affairs. Emma discovered a love of reading that kept her nose buried in books whenever chores allowed. Watching them grow and learn filled Ethan with a pride he'd thought he'd never feel again. But the greatest joy came in September when Rachel pulled Ethan aside one evening with news that made his heart nearly stop. "I'm pregnant," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. "About 2 months along, the doctor thinks." Ethan couldn't speak for a moment. The thought of becoming a father again, not just to Lily and Emma, but to a new child, a baby he'd raised from birth, was overwhelming. All his old fears came rushing back. What if something went wrong? What if he failed this child the way he'd failed Michael? But then Rachel took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach, and he felt something shift. This wasn't a replacement for what he'd lost. This was something new, something that belonged to the life he and Rachel were building together. "Are you happy?" she asked, echoing the question from their wedding day. "Terrified," he admitted, "but yes, very happy." They told the girls that night. Lily's first question was whether she could help teach the baby things. Emma wanted to know if she could share her books. Both of them seemed thrilled at the prospect of being big sisters to someone who would know Ethan as Papa from the very beginning. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Rachel glowed with health, the sickness that had nearly killed her a distant memory. Ethan found himself constantly worrying about her health, about the baby, about all the things that could go wrong. But Rachel was patient with his fears, understanding that they came from a place of love rather than doubt. "We don't get guarantees," she reminded him one evening as they sat by the fire, her hand on her growing belly. "But we get each other. We get today. That has to be enough." The baby was born on a snowy February morning, almost exactly 1 year after Ethan had first ridden into Salvation Ridge. The labor was long and difficult, and Ethan spent hours pacing the kitchen while the midwife and doctor worked upstairs. Lily and Emma tried to distract him with questions and stories, but his mind kept conjuring every terrible possibility. Then, finally, a baby's cry rang through the house. Strong and loud and absolutely perfect. The midwife came down with a smile. "You have a son, Mr. Cross. Both mother and baby are healthy." Ethan took the stairs 2 at a time. Rachel lay propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. When she saw Ethan, her smile widened. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Ethan approached slowly, his heart in his throat. The baby was tiny, red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and Rachel's storm-gray eyes. When Ethan carefully took him, the baby quieted, his small face turning toward the sound of his father's heartbeat. "He's perfect," Ethan whispered, tears streaming down his face. "He is," Rachel agreed. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names for months but hadn't settled on anything. Now, holding this small miracle who represented everything they'd survived and everything they'd built, Ethan knew exactly what the baby should be called. "Hope," he said. "His name is Hope." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Hope Cross. I love it." Lily and Emma were allowed in to meet their new brother shortly after. They approached the bed with careful reverence, their eyes wide as they studied the tiny face. "He's so small," Lily whispered. "Was I that small?" "Smaller," Rachel assured her. "You were early and barely bigger than a kitten." Emma reached out one careful finger to touch Hope's tiny hand. The baby's fingers immediately wrapped around hers, holding tight, and Emma's face transformed with wonder. "He likes me," she breathed. "Of course he likes you," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're his big sister. That's what big sisters are for, to protect and teach and love little brothers until they drive you crazy." Both girls giggled, but they stayed close, captivated by the tiny person who'd just joined their family. That night, after Rachel and Hope were sleeping and the girls were tucked into bed, Ethan stood on the porch looking up at the stars. The same stars that had watched him arrive a year ago, broken and running. The same stars that had witnessed everything since. The fear, the violence, the courage, the healing, the love. He thought about the plea that had changed everything. "Please, be our daddy today." Just one day, they'd asked, just temporary help in a moment of desperation. And here he stood, a year later, with two daughters sleeping upstairs who called him Papa without hesitation, a wife he loved more than he'd thought possible, and a newborn son named Hope sleeping in the cradle Thomas Miller had built for his own children. One day had become a lifetime. The sound of the door opening made him turn. Rachel stood there, wrapped in a shawl despite the midwife's orders to rest. "You should be sleeping," Ethan said, moving to guide her back inside. "I will. But I wanted to check on you." She studied his face in the moonlight. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. How I almost didn't stop that day when I saw the girls. How close I came to riding past, to letting someone else handle their problems." He pulled her close, careful of her healing body. "If I'd made that choice, I'd be somewhere else right now. Still running, still broken, still convinced I didn't deserve a second chance." "But you did stop." "Because a little girl asked me to be her daddy for one day. Because Emma's lips were blue from the cold and I couldn't just leave them there. Because something in me recognized that if I didn't help, I'd regret it forever." Ethan looked back at the stars. "I thought I was saving them. Turns out they were saving me." Rachel rested her head against his chest. "We saved each other. That's how family works. Not one person doing all the rescuing, but everyone holding each other up when the weight gets too heavy to carry alone." "Is this real?" Ethan asked quietly. "Sometimes I wake up afraid I'll find it was all a dream, that I'm still that broken drifter with nothing but ghosts for company." "It's real. We're real." Rachel took his hand, placed it over her heart so he could feel it beating. "Feel that? That's real. Our children sleeping upstairs, real. The life we've built, real. The love we share, real. All of it." Ethan pulled her closer, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. She was right. This was real. More real than anything he'd experienced in the 3 years before it. "I love you," he said, the words still new enough to feel momentous. "I love our family, this life, everything we've built. Thank you for giving me a reason to stop running." "Thank you for being brave enough to stay," Rachel replied. They stood together on the porch, watching the stars and listening to the quiet sounds of their home, the creak of settling timber, the soft cry of the baby from upstairs, the gentle breathing of sleeping children. Ordinary sounds that represented extraordinary healing. Spring came again, bringing with it the anniversary of Ethan and Rachel's wedding. The ranch continued to thrive, the town continued to heal, and the family continued to grow. Not in numbers, but in love and strength and the kind of deep roots that only time and commitment could build. Lily, at 10, had become a remarkable young woman, bright, determined, and showing signs of the leader she'd become. Emma, at 6, had found her voice fully, chattering constantly and reading anything she could get her hands on. Hope was a happy baby who rarely cried and seemed to find joy in everything from sunlight to his sisters' faces. One evening in late May, Ethan sat on the porch with Rachel, watching the girls play with Hope in the yard. The baby was giggling at something Lily was doing, his laughter ringing across the valley. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day?" Rachel asked. "Sometimes, but not as much as I used to." Ethan watched Emma carefully hold her baby brother, showing him a flower she'd picked. "I used to torture myself with all the what-ifs and might-have-beens. But I've learned that the only thing that matters is what actually happened. And what happened is, I found a family when I wasn't looking for one. Found a reason to believe in futures instead of just surviving present moments. No regrets? About staying, not a single one." Ethan looked at his wife, still amazed sometimes that this extraordinary woman had chosen to build a life with him. "About the years I wasted running? Maybe. But even those led me here, so I can't regret them too much." Rachel smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad you stopped running." "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, listening to Hope's laughter and the girls' gentle teasing. The sun painted the mountains gold and crimson, the same colors Ethan had seen the day he arrived, but somehow more beautiful now that he had people to share them with. In the distance, Salvation Ridge bustled with evening activity. A town that had remembered how to live without fear, that had rebuilt itself from the ruins of corruption into something stronger and more resilient. Ethan had been part of that rebuilding, but he'd also been rebuilt by it. He thought about the man he'd been a year ago, hollow, broken, running from ghosts. That man wouldn't have believed this future was possible, wouldn't have believed he deserved happiness or that love could bloom from tragedy. But that man hadn't met two desperate girls on a frozen road, hadn't heard the plea that would change everything. Please be our daddy today. One day had become 1 year, had become a lifetime. And standing here now, surrounded by the family he'd chosen and who had chosen him, Ethan finally understood something he'd been searching for since the day he lost Sarah and Michael. Redemption wasn't about erasing the past or pretending the pain had never happened. It was about accepting that grief and joy could coexist, that loving again didn't betray those you'd lost, that second chances weren't about deserving, but about choosing. He'd chosen to stop, chosen to stay, chosen to love again despite the fear. And in making those choices, he'd found something he'd thought was lost forever, a reason to wake up each morning with hope instead of dread, a purpose beyond mere survival, a future worth building. Emma called to him from the yard, asking him to come see how high she could make Hope laugh by tossing her doll in the air. Lily wanted to show him the calculations she'd been working on for the ranch's fall harvest planning. Rachel squeezed his hand, her smile saying everything words couldn't. This was his life now, his family, his home, and it was more than enough. It was everything. Ethan stood, crossed the porch, and descended the steps into the yard where his daughters waited with their baby brother, where laughter and love and the ordinary magic of family filled the evening air. He'd stopped running. He'd found home. And sometimes, more often than not these days, he found himself grateful for the frozen morning that had changed everything, for the two little girls brave enough to ask a stranger for help, for the woman strong enough to let him love her, for the second chance he hadn't known he was searching for. Family, he'd learned, wasn't always something you were born into. Sometimes it was something you chose, protected, and fought for. Sometimes it was something that saved you even as you tried to save it. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, it was the answer to a plea you hadn't known you'd been making all along, for a reason to stop running, for a place to belong, for a love strong enough to heal even the deepest wounds. "Papa," Emma called, pulling him from his thoughts. "Come play with us." "Coming," he called back, and meant it with his whole heart. He was coming home. He was already there. And for the first time in 3 years, that was exactly where he wanted to be.